Chapter 252. Yan Qiue in her pajamas, Xiao Tong with a child in her arms, Er Dai with an abnormal brain, Gu Panpan with her face still covered in seaweed mud, Yan Hanqing with a pink apron, and Gu Chuan with a twisted expression. The only one who looked normal was probably Fu Jingmo. However, he was an ordinary person, and that was the biggest abnormality. Of course, there was also Xiao Qing. Xiao Qing looked at her group of freakish teammates and her expression stiffened. There's a challenge. Pan Pan, you can go wash your face first. Han Qing, I still have a pot of soup in the kitchen. If you're too lazy to go out, you can watch the soup for me. If you're willing to go out, you can take off your scarf. Qiue, go change your clothes first. What if you ruin your pajamas when we fight later? After she finished speaking, those who originally thought that she was normal suddenly felt that Xiao Qing was the most abnormal one. Yan Hanqing was the first to move. He took off his apron and passed it to Fu Jingmo. His intention was simple: Fu Jingmo would be in charge of watching the soup. Gu Chuan reached out and took the apron. His voice was also wooden. I'll do it. Xiao Qing looked at him again and couldn't help but admire Gu Chuan's attentiveness. Gu Chuan was really a meticulous person, so he could see the distrust in her eyes. Thus, only Fu Jingmo and Gu Chuan were left behind. The rest of the people packed up and accompanied this group of people to the square. In the base, it was very common for people to come out to solve problems if there was a grudge, but it wasn't a deep hatred. Therefore, it was very common for people to come out to solve problems. Whether it was ordinary people or mutants, they all liked to watch such a scene. The days were long and boring. If there was nothing to relieve their boredom, it would be very boring. Moreover, watching a scene was a unique hobby of the people. Even during the apocalypse, their love for watching a scene didn't diminish. When Xiao Qing and the group of people stood in the middle of the square, those experienced people knew that the one-on-one fight was about to begin. They crowded around them. However, those onlookers were quite sensible. They knew to leave an open space for them to fight. Mutants didn't have eyes. If you were accidentally injured when you got too close, you could only blame it on your bad luck. You couldn't blame anyone. Who asked you to come over to watch the show? Of course, the most important thing was that the youths group was a famous mutant team. They were ranked in the base. Even if you were accidentally injured, you wouldn't dare to find trouble with them. After Xiao Qing and the others sat down in their respective seats, the two sides began to discuss. Since everyone is ready, let's not waste time. Who's the first one? Xiao Qing calmly played with her long fingernails and lazily raised her eyebrows. The fair-skinned youth pointed at a man beside him. The man looked quite strong. When he stood up, his muscles tightened, and his whole body became stronger. There was no need for Xiao Qing to ask as Gu Panpan stood up on her own. She was petite and cute, with a bit of baby fat. Especially when she stood next to the sturdy man, the contrast couldn't be more obvious. Some people around couldn't help but shout at the strong man, Lu San, how can you bear to hurt such a weak girl? Why don't you take her home and make her your wife? Lu San waved his hand and the fat on his face trembled. Go away, go away. Chapter 253. The fair-skinned young man didn't underestimate Gu Panpan. In this post-apocalyptic world, the younger the paranormals were, the more dangerous they were. It was like how the younger the paranormals were, the easier it was for them to mutate into high-level zombies after being infected. Young people's potential and speed of evolution were faster. Gu Panpan dared to be the first one to stand out, so she must have some real skills. However, he believed in Lu San. Although Lu San was a strength paranormal, and in the middle of the post-apocalyptic world, strength paranormals had gradually fallen behind, but Lu San's strength was still very strong. Ordinary nature paranormals at the same level didn't dare to say that they could defeat Lu San. The two paranormals stood in the middle, and then the fight began. From the beginning, the gap between Gu Panpan and Lu San could be seen. As soon as Lu San came up, the first thing he did was to activate his ability. He was a very strong man, and as soon as he activated his ability, his muscles swelled, and his whole body seemed to be inflated with air. As for Gu Panpan, she didn't even activate her ability before she gave Lu San a kick. She was already a very high-level strength-based ability user. Even if she didn't activate her ability, her strength was still much higher than that of an average ability user. Lu San was busy activating his ability, so Gu Panpan's kick caused him to fall on his butt, causing him to sit on the ground. Before the crowd laughed, Lu San's face turned red. It was indeed a very shameful thing to be kicked to the ground by a little girl. Then Gu Panpan activated her ability. If it was said that Lu San's entire body had grown bigger and looked extremely tall, then Gu Panpan's appearance after she activated her ability was horrifying. She was a thin and cute little girl, but in an instant, she became a muscular and powerful King Kong Barbie. Her face and body were extremely uncoordinated, and it looked a little scary at first glance. For the next few minutes, it was Gu Panpan's show. The onlookers all had their mouths and eyes wide open as they stared at the scene. Gu Panpan was like a female Hercules, grabbing Lu San's leg and swinging him around like a sack. She beat him up in all sorts of ways. From start to finish, Lu San didn't even have the chance to fight back. In 3 minutes, Lu San was lying on the ground with a bloody nose and a swollen face. Gu Panpan moved her hands and feet and complained, "I just warmed up. Why is he lying on the ground? Boring." The onlookers were speechless. This was a female tiger, a female Tyrannosaurus Rex, a female Tyrannosaurus. Women really couldn't be judged by appearance. Xiao Qing looked at the fair-skinned man with a smile. Panpan is young, she doesn't like to think before she speaks. Don't be angry. That person was obviously furious, but he could only grit his teeth and say, "Of course I'm not angry. I like such a straightforward personality." Who's next? Panpan hasn't had enough fun yet. Naturally, it's still her. Xiao Qing said indifferently. To tell the truth, she had not prepared for a second person to go up today. Gu Panpan going up against 5 was a simple matter that could not be any simpler. The fair-skinned man's mouth was a little stiff. After a while, he said, "In that case, Li Qi, you go." Another silent youth stood up and walked over. The moment he made his move, it could be seen that he was much stronger than Lu San. However, he only made a single move before he was beaten up. Gu Panpan hadn't sparred with anyone for a long time, especially the feeling of punching flesh. It was very comfortable. As long as she got close, there was no way to turn the tables. Li Qi only had time to release a wind blade before he was beaten into the air by Gu Panpan. Then, for the next 3 minutes, his feet didn't touch the ground. It was over before it even started. The fair-skinned youth's expression was already very ugly. 2 people had come out in a row, and they had both been beaten up like dead dogs by Gu Panpan. More importantly, Gu Panpan didn't even use any moves. She only used her bare fists to beat them up, and the 2 of them were lying on the ground. This was a disgrace. Xiao Qing, on the other hand, was smiling rather happily. She propped up her chin and said, "Panpan, are you tired? Do you want Han Qing to replace you?" Gu Panpan shook her head like a rattledrum. "Sister Qing, I just finished warming up. I'm not tired at all." The fair-skinned man became even more depressed. He gritted his teeth and said, "We agreed on 3 wins out of 5. It's not very good for you to only send 1 person." Xiao Qing touched her chin and felt that she should give the other party some face. She said, "Panpan, why don't you come down first? I'll warm up with you later. Who wants to go up for another round?" Yan Hanqing said, "How about I do it?" Xiao Qing nodded. Yan Hanqing was a lightning ability user. She was actually quite worried that Yan Hanqing couldn't control his power well and directly kill the other party. However, since Yan Hanqing was willing to fight, she naturally wouldn't stop him. In fact, she was quite happy. After all, Yan Hanqing was usually very boring and rarely asked for help. As soon as Yan Hanqing stood up, the fair-skinned man also gritted his teeth and stood up. They were playing 3 wins out of 5. If they lost this round, then there wouldn't be a next round. So, he had to make a comeback. Otherwise, their face as an ability user team would be completely lost. After all, as long as someone investigated, they would know why this competition started. They went to find trouble and proposed a competition of 3 wins out of 5. In the end, they let the other party win 3 times in a row. They didn't even have a chance to win 5 rounds. How embarrassing would that be? At the thought of this, the fair-skinned man's face became a lot heavier. He was more stressed. After all the burden was on his shoulders. On the other hand, Yan Hanqing's expression remained the same. He stood there in a very serious manner. Although he did not move at all, he was already prepared to make a move. Every muscle in his body was already tense. As long as he had a thought, he would be able to quickly make a move. Please. The fair-skinned man stretched out his hand and said seriously. Chapter 254. There was a phrase called instant kill, which was very suitable to describe the current scene. Yan Hanqing was not going to bully people, so he didn't use those big moves. He just used thunder and lightning on the surface of his body when he attacked, which meant that there was electricity in his every movement. In this way, when he fought with the opponent, the electric current would slightly paralyze the opponent, causing the opponent's movement to stagnate. Then he could slowly deal with the opponent. On one hand, it gave Shaoqing face, and on the other hand, it saved the opponent's face. However, Yan Hanqing usually dealt with those high-level zombies, mutated animals and so on. The only paranormals were also some scums that he didn't need to hold back. It could be said that during this period of time, all the fights were with the purpose of killing. So when he suddenly held back, Yan Hanqing didn't control his strength well. As soon as they fought, the lightning on the surface of his body directly stunned the opponent. The lightning crackled and exploded on the opponent's body, and then there was a faint burnt smell, floating out. Yan Hanqing was stunned. He really didn't expect this, and even thought about showing mercy, but in the end, the fair-skinned young man fainted after being electrocuted. However, he woke up after being fed some saliva by his subordinates. His eyes were lifeless and his hair was still smoking. After a long while, he said with difficulty, "We admit defeat. I will send someone to deliver the agreed compensation for mental damage before afternoon. Also, I'm sorry." Shaoqing looked at him and felt sorry for him, so she said, "It's not a big deal. It's just some money. Don't forget to send it to me in the afternoon. Also, don't forget the last thing you promised me." At the mention of the last condition, a few people's eyes turned red. In broad daylight, in a public place with so many onlookers, Shaoqing actually asked them to crawl away. This was no longer as simple as slapping people's faces. It was simply making a mortal enemy. But was Shaoqing the kind of person who was afraid of offending people? To put it bluntly, she was used to being lawless, especially after knowing this group of people around her. She was extremely trusted and supported by them, so she was even more spoiled. It's already the end of the world, why should I suppress my temper and make life difficult for myself? Shaoqing looked at the men who came to look for trouble the day before and said with a smile, "At that time, I also said that the loser would have to crawl out of here. You're not going back on your words, are you?" One of them said, "Don't go too far in life. Don't go too far in the future." Shaoqing didn't care, but there was no warmth in her eyes. "So you're not going to fulfill your promise?" Now, they were talking about not being too ruthless. Who was the one who took her house and wanted to do something to her? This was too much of a double standard. Could it be that only the state officials were allowed to set fires but the common people were not allowed to light lamps? This matter was indeed too damaging to their reputation. The few of them looked at each other. They were determined not to keep their promise. Xiao Qing looked at their red eyes and suddenly laughed. That day, you guys forcefully occupied my house and even touched me. At that time, I was in a good mood and didn't want to lower myself to your level, so I let you guys go. Who would have thought that the next day, you guys would bring people over to find fault with me? If you want to find fault with me, then so be it. If you lose, then crawl out of here. Although I think you guys are useless, you guys look like men. I didn't expect that I was wrong. But I didn't think that I was wrong. No matter how thick-skinned those people were, they couldn't help but feel ashamed. After all, they were the ones who took someone else's house. They were the ones who spoke rudely. After that, they were the ones who found people to look for trouble. They were also the ones who agreed to those conditions. Chapter 255. Now that they had lost, wouldn't they still be the ones to turn their backs on them? Although they were a little embarrassed, they still straightened their necks and refused to admit it. Otherwise, if they crawled out of here today, their reputation would spread all over the base tomorrow. Xiao Qing wasn't going to let them off. There was a saying that went, "Heaven's sins can be forgiven, but the sins we bring upon ourselves are the hardest to bear." It was all their own doing, so how could they beg others to be soft-hearted? Gu Panpan was the fastest. She hadn't had enough fun, and now that she took a big step forward, someone who wanted to stop her was directly slapped to the ground by her. The other person was one of the group that came yesterday. Gu Panpan grabbed his shoulder and pressed it down hard. That person was originally standing on the ground, but this time, his legs couldn't help but give way and he knelt on the ground. Gu Panpan was so strong that only a crisp sound was heard and that person's kneecap was broken. He screamed in pain, and his pants were dyed red with blood. When the rest of the people saw this, they directly attacked Gu Panpan. Xiao Qing was very relieved and let Gu Panpan play, but she watched carefully. If Gu Panpan was in any danger, she would be able to save her immediately. Gu Panpan picked a group by herself, and her eyesight was very good. Those who had their legs broken by her were definitely those who came yesterday. Soon, a group of people were lying on the ground, screaming in pain. Only then did Gu Panpan stop. Rolling up her sleeves, she walked toward Xiao Qing, pouting as she muttered, "Who told you to have such foul mouths? Humph, if I had known earlier, I would have used more strength and crushed all of your bones to help my big sister Qing vent her anger." The fair-skinned youth had been watching expressionlessly. On one side was the promise he made, and on the other side was his own brothers. He had nothing to say, and could only wait for everything to end. He silently clasped his hands to Xiao Qing and prepared to leave with his brothers. Xiao Qing said lightly, "Don't forget your promise." "I said crawl out, not carry him out." He gritted his teeth, his chest trembling with anger, but he didn't say anything. After all, they were the ones who had agreed. They were like frogs at the bottom of a well, looking at the sky from the bottom of a well. They thought that they were strong enough to look down on most paranormals and that they would definitely win. In the end, they realized that there was always someone better than them out there. They had lost so decisively and so miserably. Everyone had to be responsible for their own decisions. They were the ones who had promised. If they wanted to go back on their word, they naturally had to pay the price. The fair-skinned young man gritted his teeth and said, "Just crawl out of the square, right?" Xiao Qing nodded. He took a deep breath and said, "Okay." Almost all of those people's legs were broken. When they crawled on the ground, they left a trail of blood one after another until they reached the edge of the square. Then they were picked up and taken away by others. The onlookers were silent. Probably they had never seen Xiao Qing's cruel means. Xiao Qing sneered and said, "Look at him. It makes me feel like I'm the bad guy. I'm the one who took someone else's house and asked them to crawl out. Yan Qiue said lightly, the paranormal team these people belong to should belong to the kind with relatively high status in S-City survivor base. They are used to being arrogant and domineering. They can't see their own mistakes. No matter what happens, it must be someone else's fault. Yan Qiue's analysis hit the nail on the head. Xiao Qing looked at the bloodstains on the ground and walked back lazily. There was still a pot of soup on the stove. She didn't know whether Gu Chuan had brought it or not. She didn't add salt when she went out. The crowd couldn't see the excitement, and they were frightened by Xiao Qing's character. They gradually dispersed, but a few people didn't leave. Instead, they went to Xiao Qing and said, "Miss, please wait a moment." Xiao Qing looked at the person who called her. It was a beautiful woman with a gentle expression. She was followed by several paranormals. The woman was also a paranormal. She chuckled and said, "I want to talk business with you." Xiao Qing looked back at her and asked lazily, "What business?" When she said this, Xiao Qing was actually a little impatient. After so long, it was almost 10 o'clock, and her friends still hadn't eaten breakfast. Especially Yan Qiue, he was in poor health and had gastric problems. Although he rarely had gastric problems after Lin Menya's medicinal diet, he still had to eat on time, or his stomach would still be damaged. What was more, Xiao Qing was still thinking about the pot of soup on the stove. She had been boiling it for the whole morning. If Lin Menya forgot about it or finished it when they brought it down, it wouldn't taste good. The woman was very perceptive. Seeing that Xiao Qing was a little impatient, she hurriedly said, "It's like this. My young master wants to go to the forest to catch some high-level mutant animals. Previously, he hired a top-ranked team of paranormals in the base, but after they went a little deeper, they lost a lot of people and gave up the mission. I see that your team is full of elites. I don't know if you are interested in taking this mission. Of course, the reward is very generous. If you have any other requirements, you can also tell us. As long as it's not too excessive, we'll consider it." Wasn't it the task she had seen before? Xiao Qing touched her chin. In fact, she was quite interested in this task. Of course, she was interested in the forest. The forest was very vast, and there must be a lot of mutant animals and plants in it. Yan Qiue would definitely like this forest very much, because in his eyes, the whole forest was an experiment material. As for the other members of the team, this forest was also very good. Those high-level mutant animals and plants were very suitable for practicing. On the one hand, they could practice their skills. On the other hand, they could also get a high-level mutant animal's crystal nucleus and flesh. They could also find medicinal materials and mutant plants in the forest. If they only considered this, this mission was really suitable for them. However, Xiao Qing still had to consider more. The most important point was that they had just returned home. If they immediately rushed out, it would be too tiring. Xiao Qing didn't say perfunctorily. She said seriously, "I'll think about it. If you're still interested, you can go to the task hall. We've left some people there." The woman was very sensible and didn't disturb Xiao Qing anymore. Xiao Qing nodded and left with her friends. Her footsteps were very hurried. When she got home and saw the soup on the table, she breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, it wasn't in vain. Chapter 256. After eating and drinking, Xiao Qing began to think about the task. She had her eyes on a few tasks, and it just so happened that their timings were together. If she accepted one task, she would easily miss the other one. The third task was okay. After all, cleaning up a city was a large-scale task. It would take a long time and require a lot of manpower. Especially the deeper she went, the more powerful the zombies she would encounter, and the slower the progress would be. In short, this task could be accepted at any time. The next task was the one she met today. Xiao Qing wanted to accept the task of escorting the researchers to the capital first. If the two tasks conflicted, she could only choose one of them. Xiao Qing thought a lot, and finally decided to go to the task hall. Didn't the woman say that they left some people in the task hall? Xiao Qing could go and ask. So after eating, Xiao Qing held the little bun's hand and took the two sticky candies that she couldn't tear off, and went to the task hall. The task hall was very lively today, and the number of people was more than half of the usual. Xiao Qing didn't think much about it. After squeezing in, she quickly saw the delicate girl standing under the task sign. The girl was holding a sign in her hand, and on the sign was the task of going deep into the forest. Xiao Qing walked over. How long will this task last? The girl was very serious. It's like this. Because of the danger in the forest, we don't dare to go in. My master wants to gather more people and go in together. So the task will last until the end of the month. At the beginning of the next month, we will count the people who have accepted the task and choose some of them to go into the forest together. This way, the safety factor will be higher. Thank you. Xiao Qing nodded. It was easy to get the time. The distance from here to the capital was not far, and she didn't need to wait until the end of the month to go back and forth. She could accept the task first, and then come back to accept this task. After thinking about it, Xiao Qing accepted the task first, and then reported it to the clerk in the hall. After recording it, she went to see the other task. At another mission point, it was already crowded with people. There was a long queue for registration. Xiao Qing frowned. She was almost pushed down by the crowd. Dai helped her up. Meanwhile, Yan Qiue found a young man and asked him, "Hey, what's going on?" The young man looked at Yan Qiue and said, "Didn't you have a mission to escort an expert from the south to the capital?" There were too many people who signed up, so the base chief issued an announcement saying that a portion of the people who signed up would be selected. Therefore, the base chief arranged some rewards, saying that those who were selected would receive a reward. In addition to the reward from the mission itself, it was very generous. Therefore, when the news came out, those who didn't sign up before came to sign up. Xiao Qing came to a sudden realization. There was a saying that went, "The world is bustling, and everyone comes for profit. The world is bustling, and everyone goes for profit." Wasn't this the most realistic portrayal? Xiao Qing, who originally wanted to sign up, gave up the idea. Now, there should be enough people, and she wouldn't be needed. She would just wait for the next task to start. Although she didn't sign up, Xiao Qing went to watch the competition on the day of the competition. Lin Xiaofeng, the captain of the Gale Paranormal Team, and Qing Jiao also participated. Base Chief Hao Yun even attended the competition in person, which showed that he attached great importance to this competition. Hao Yun was a rather young man. From his appearance, he seemed to be around 26 or 27 years old. Although he wasn't considered handsome, he was still considered delicate and pretty. Coupled with his gentle smile and extraordinary aura, he was still able to control the situation. Chapter 257. However, Xiao Qing had only watched half of the game. To be honest, after watching the friendly match in the capital, watching this was like watching a child's play. Xiao Qing was really not interested in watching anymore. After all, the friendly match in the capital had gathered all the top masters in the capital. It could be said that most of the best masters in the country were there. Naturally, it was not comparable to the S-City Survivor base. The strength of Lin Xiaofeng's team was not bad. This time, they were definitely among the winners. Xiao Qing watched for a while, then left. Instead of watching this here, it was better to go back and study what to eat at night, and what soup to make next time. She had been making different kinds of soup, and so far, she hadn't changed one. They were supposed to set off the next day, but because of some delays, the team that escorted the experts to the capital officially set off on the fourth day. Xiao Qing and the others rested in the base for about 10 days. Then, they were notified that the employer was going to choose someone. Not many people accepted this task. At least, it was not as good as the task of escorting the experts, but there were still a lot of people. At least, when Xiao Qing and her friends arrived at the designated location, there were already a lot of people waiting there. The employer arrived right on time. He was followed by two paranormals. At first glance, Xiao Qing knew that the two paranormals were not weak. To her surprise, the employer was not old. He looked to be about 15 or 16 years old. His delicate little face still had a little baby fat. When he stood next to Gu Pan Pan, he was very suitable for the occasion. The boy stared with a pair of big black eyes, trying to make himself look more serious. However, the more serious he was, the cuter he looked. Xiao Qing didn't know a lot of people around, but there were some familiar faces. For example, a young man who had won 3 out of 5 games with her and left with a group of crippled people. Xiao Qing also learned his name today. He was called Cheng, and Cheng An's face turned green when he saw Xiao Qing. After all, he had been tortured badly by Xiao Qing and the others. Xiao Qing hadn't even made a move from the beginning to the end. The young man cleared his throat and said, "I need 2 teams of paranormals to protect my safety. Everyone present, who is more confident in their team, can take a step forward." When it came to confidence, Xiao Qing was more confident, so she took a step forward. As soon as Cheng'an raised his foot, he saw Xiao Qing standing next to him. His expression became a little twisted, and he retracted his foot. He didn't want to be humiliated in front of everyone. Cheng An's team was ranked very high in the entire base. If he didn't move forward, the rest of the team wouldn't dare to move forward either. Thus, everyone looked at Xiao Qing strangely. Those who knew the inside story were secretly laughing. This time, Cheng'an had been bitten once and was afraid of ropes for 10 years. Those who didn't know the inside story were also snickering. They were laughing at Xiao Qing and the others for being such country bumpkins. Cheng'an hadn't even become a pervert yet, but this group of hotheads had already stepped forward. The young man glanced around and asked, "Don't you all have confidence?" Cheng'an braced himself and took a step forward. The reward for this mission was very generous, and he didn't want to give up yet. Among the remaining people, those who didn't know the inside story also stepped forward one after another. After all, there were 2 spots. If they couldn't beat Cheng'an, how could they lose to a group of country bumpkins? The young man nodded and said, "Those who don't have confidence can go back. Xiaofang, give everyone 10 second-grade crystals as a reward for their hard work." His move could be considered generous. Those people took the reward and retreated to the side, but they didn't plan to leave. They still wanted to watch a good show. Chapter 258. The rest were those who were confident in themselves. The young man said with a serious face, "I only need 2 teams of paranormals. That is to say, among you, there are still a few teams of paranormals who want to leave. I'll make it clear first, because the forest is full of dangers, if you're too weak, you'll just be delivering yourself to death. Everyone should think twice before you act." However, the people who came here were not unreasonable. They must have done their research in advance and were confident in themselves. That was why they came here. After all, who would be willing to die for no reason? Since no one wanted to leave, the young man continued, "You can use whatever means you have, whether it's persuasion or a one-on-one duel. The remaining 2 teams of ability users can take on this mission." As soon as his voice fell, everyone's eyes fell on Xiao Qing. After all, they had to pick the weakest one. In their hearts, Cheng'an was the toughest one, so naturally, they had to go around him. And Xiao Qing was undoubtedly the softest one. Then, the softest persimmon in their hearts turned her eyes to Cheng, and Xiao Qing smiled calmly, and her eyes looked very gentle. "Do you want another one-on-one?" Cheng'an was very rational. "I think we need to talk. You see, he needs 2 spots. So, we don't have to kill each other at all. We can even work together, forget about our past differences, and take these 2 spots. Those who wanted to watch a good show heard this and felt that something was wrong. What kind of temper did Qing'an have? How could he be soft to a nameless team? So, when they looked at Xiaoqing and the others again, their eyes were full of inquiry and doubt. Xiaoqing thought about it seriously and finally said, I think, instead of keeping a team of ability users who have a grudge against me and have to go deep into the dangerous forest with me, it's better to choose a team that is slightly weaker, but won't harm me behind my back. Qing'an was a sensible person. He immediately said, if during this mission, I set a trap for you, or if our people set a trap for your people, then even if you want to kill someone, I will definitely not take revenge. Xiaoqing nodded with satisfaction and reached out her hand. Deal. Qing'an reached out his hand with a complicated look and shook Xiaoqing's hand. Deal. Once the 2 of them reached a consensus, they looked around. Qing'an said, is there anyone who wants to fight one-on-one? I'll take them all. Seeing that Qing'an and Xiaoqing had joined forces, the group of people immediately sighed. The reward for this mission was very generous, and they really didn't want to give it up. However, when they saw that the 2 teams of paranormals had formed an alliance, they knew that no matter which team joined forces, they would never be able to defeat Qing'an. Anyone with a brain would know that Xiaoqing's side was definitely not weaker than Chang'an's, because unless there were special circumstances, the strong would not cooperate with the weak on equal terms. Therefore, some people left. The remaining few were paranormals who knew their own strength. Xiaoqing glanced at Qing'an with a smile. Qing'an immediately understood that if he wanted to form an alliance with Xiaoqing, he had to at least show some sincerity. Therefore, he took a step forward and said to the remaining paranormals, time waits for no one. Let's not waste time. Come on, let's have a best of 3. Although the remaining paranormals were more confident in their own strength, there was still a very serious problem. That was, when they faced Chang'an's team, they could only be chopped up like vegetables. Therefore, the rest of them also left. There were only 2 paranormals left in the field, one on Chang'an's side, and the other on Xiaoqing's side. Xiaoqing was very satisfied. She didn't have to do anything. It saved time and effort. Qing'an was quite discerning. The young man waved his hand and asked his subordinates to send the remaining people away. Of course, he didn't forget to give everyone a little reward for their hard work. Then, he walked over and stretched out his hand with a serious face. My name is Qin Zishi. Please take care of me in the future. Xiaoqing and the others shook hands with him. After exchanging names, Qin Zishi said, does anyone have anything to pack? If you do, you can go pack now. We'll set off early tomorrow morning. After packing, if you're free, we can have a meal together. Xiaoqing rejected his good intentions and then went home with her friends. There were a lot of things to pack. She had to bring everything that she needed to bring. This time, Fu Jingma stayed behind to look after the house. After all, he was the only ordinary person in the entire paranormals team. The forest was more dangerous, so it wasn't suitable for him to follow. Therefore, he naturally stayed behind. Xiaoqing, on the other hand, packed up her things and prepared to leave with her friends. This time, they would be gone for more than half a month. They still needed to bring some more important things, especially seasonings, kitchen utensils, tableware, and fresh fruits and vegetables. These were indispensable. Xiaoqing emptied her space. Now, 1/3 of the space was occupied by clothes, snacks, medicine, and so on. 1/3 of the space was used to store crystals, and the remaining 1/3 was used to store these things. After packing their things and telling Fu Jingma, they were ready to set off. Chapter 259. Qin Zishi didn't bring many people with him. There were 2 paranormals and 2 girls. Including him, there were only 5 people. Then there were Xiaoqing's and Chang'an's squads. Overall, there were still a lot of people. The next morning, as soon as the gate of the base opened, they went out in a mighty manner. The vehicles were provided by Qin Zishi. There were a total of 5 cars with special drivers. When they reached the outside of the forest, they would leave the cars and enter the forest. The drivers would wait outside until they came out, then pick them up. They didn't talk much along the way. When they reached the forest, they had to leave the cars and walk into the forest. Only then did they have a short conversation. It was a very short conversation. They just arranged the formation for entering the forest. Cheng An's team was in charge of opening the way, Xiao Qing's team was in charge of the rear, and Qin Zishi was in the middle. It was relatively safe at the edge of the forest. The real danger would be revealed one by one when they went deep into the forest. During lunch, Xiao Qing saw someone who was even more awesome than her. One had to know that Xiao Qing always brought pots and pans with her when she went out. She even brought seasonings with her. This had already caused many people who knew her to complain about her. However, Qin Zishi brought a set of picnic equipment, including red wine, desserts, and fruits. It was extremely luxurious. The 2 girls on Qin Zishi's left and right were putting food in his bowl. The group of people was stunned. Qin Zishi brought a chef and a maid with him. Looking at Qin Zishi and Xiao Qing, they didn't think that Xiao Qing had brought pots and pans and a barbecue grill when she went out. After all, there was only harm when there was a comparison. After lunch, Qin Zishi called everyone over and said, "This time, I want to enter the forest to catch some high-level mutant animals. One thing is that I want them alive." As soon as he said that, Cheng An's face changed a little. After all, there was a big difference between catching a mutant animal alive and killing one. If the difficulty of killing a mutant animal was 1, then the difficulty of catching one alive was 10, and the casualties would be correspondingly higher. According to Qin Zishi, he didn't want ordinary low-level mutant animals, but at least level 3 ones. Everyone present was a level 3 paranormal. It was self-evident that it was difficult to catch a level 3 mutant animal alive. No wonder he offered such a high reward. It was said that there was no such thing as a free lunch in the sky. Even if there was a free lunch in the sky, the filling would be poisonous. Look, he was just smashing a bag on his head. So, Cheng's question was asked, why do you have to catch them alive? Although it is said that every part of a mutated animal is a treasure, the value of a living mutated animal and a dead mutated animal is not much different. On the contrary, the labor and casualties involved are simply not proportional to the cost. Qin Zishi hesitated for a moment, then said, "Since I've hired you, there are some things that I can't hide from you. The reason why I need live mutant animals is related to my special ability. My special ability is beast taming. As the name suggests, I can tame living mutant beasts. So, for me, only living mutant animals are valuable. That's why I need high-level mutant animals." He spoke from the bottom of his heart. Although Cheng'an was still a little unwilling, he didn't say anything more. After all, he had chosen the task himself. At that time, Qin Zishi had made it clear that the difficulty of the task was proportional to the reward. Chapter 260. If he blamed the difficulty of the task, wouldn't it only mean that he was useless? On the other hand, Xiao Qing was calmer. She held the little bun in her arms and warmed the milk for him while asking, "Do you have any requirements for the species of mutant beasts? I'm a level 3 paranormal now. For me, level 3 mutant beasts are the most suitable. If they're too weak, they'll be useless. If they're too strong, I won't be able to control them. Besides, the number of mutant beasts I can tame is limited. My biggest goal this time is to find the most suitable mutant beast for me to fight with." Qin Zishi said with a serious face, "I hope this mutant beast is a species with high fighting power, or has some special ability. The higher the fighting power, the better. Thank you for your help. We've been paid to do this." It's natural for us to work for you since we've been paid by you. Xiao Qing didn't ask for nothing. First, she had to choose one kind of mutant beast, and then avoid other dangerous ones as much as possible. She had to go straight to this one, which would be more efficient. She used to stay in the jungle for a long time, so she knew more about the habits of animals than ordinary people. After listening to Qin Zixi request, she listed several mutant beasts. Among them, tigers and bears were the best choices, followed by leopards and pythons. If she couldn't find any of these four, she could only see if she could catch a few wolves. Among them, Xiao Qing thought the bear was the best choice. It could be said to be a combination of attack and defense. It could protect Qin Zixi well, and its fighting power was also very high. It was definitely the best choice for a paranormal with the ability to tame animals. Xiao Qing told Qin Zixi her idea, and the result was the same as Qin Zixi's. At first, he also thought that these were the best choices. If he could tame one of them, and it was above level 3, this trip would be perfect. After all, mutant beasts were much stronger than paranormal at the same level. However, they didn't have the intelligence of human beings, so they were defeated by human beings. What if a high-level mutant beast was accompanied by a person who could command it? That would be a little scary. He would definitely be invincible among his peers. Unless he met a monster like Xiao Qing who didn't play by the rules. Therefore, Xiao Qing was very optimistic about Qin Zixi's future fighting ability. If Qin Zixi practiced some fighting skills to protect himself, then his fighting ability and threat would go up another level. After confirming the general goal, Qin Zixi demonstrated his beast-taming ability. From Qin Zixi's sleeve, a small emerald green snake suddenly crawled out. This small snake's scales were especially beautiful, just like pieces of jade. The thin scales clung tightly to its body, making its round little head look charmingly naive. As soon as the snake appeared, Yan Qiue almost couldn't control herself and used her superpower. Fortunately, Xiao Qing found out in time and held her down, so that Yan Qiue didn't lose her composure. Even so, Yan Qiue's forehead was still covered in a thin layer of sweat. This was not because he was afraid of snakes. After all, it was a snake that even dared to dissect people. It was because this snake was too poisonous. A drop of its venom could kill an elephant in an instant, let alone a human. Moreover, this snake had been mutated, so its venom should be even more terrible. Yan Qiue now admired Qin Zixi. He dared to raise such a poisonous snake. Wasn't he afraid of being bitten by it in the middle of the night? He wouldn't even know how he died. Qin Zixi wasn't afraid. He touched the little snake's head and said, "Xiao Chui is the first mutant beast I've tamed since my beast-taming ability awakened. It's very obedient. You don't have to be afraid." Chapter 261. Even those who weren't afraid of the little snake peed their pants after listening to Yan Qiue's explanation. The bravest one wasn't Xiao Qing, but Little Bun. He squatted down and patted Xiao Chui's head. Then, he happily raised Yiye and said to Qin Zixi, "I have one too. This is Yiye. It likes carrots." Qin Zixi blinked his big eyes. After a long time, he couldn't help but reach out and pat Little Bun. Then, he shyly retracted his hand and said in a serious tone, "Your Yiye is also very cute." Little Bun was immediately pleased. It was easy to please Little Bun. Either praise Xiao Qing or Yiye. Qin Zixi was exactly what he liked. Therefore, Little Bun took out a piece of milk candy from his little pouch and generously handed it to Qin Zixi. "This is for you." Usually, when this happened, it meant that Little Bun was saying, "With this piece of candy, you'll be my friend." Qin Zixi didn't stand on ceremony with Little Bun. After receiving the candy, he even gave Little Bun a pudding. That pudding was obviously his more precious stock. When he gave it away, he felt a little heartache. Qin Zixi was still young and had a childish temperament. Little Bun didn't have a playmate since he was young, but he quickly became familiar with Qin Zishi. The two people, one snake, and one rabbit quickly left Xiao Qing and the others to play at the side. Xiao Qing felt a little helpless. Then, she began to face some problems. For example, since the end of the world until now, because she was worried about Little Bun, she had to bring him along with her every time she went on a mission. When she returned to the base, there was no one around the same age as her, so she hadn't made any friends. Xiao Tong didn't count. Xiao Qing had seen Xiao Tong and Little Bun communicate. It was like a chicken talking to a duck, and the situation was very awkward. Of course, when they didn't communicate, they still got along very well. After all, when Xiao Qing wasn't around, Xiao Tong took care of Little Bun. The two of them had a unique friendship. Qin Zishi was Little Bun's first true friend. Thinking about it carefully, Xiao Qing felt quite ashamed. Why did the Little Bun like Yiya so much? He hugged Yiya every day and was very close to her. It was all because he did not have any friends to play with, so Yiya automatically became the existence of his friends. Now that Qin Zishi was here, Xiao Qing breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that not only did she have to pay attention to the Little Bun's quality of life, she also had to pay attention to his psychological problems. Qin Zishi was a pretty good little boy. Although he deliberately pulled a long face every day to make himself look more serious, his puffy face only made him look cuter. More importantly, Qin Zishi liked the Little Bun from the bottom of his heart. It could be seen from his actions that Qin Zishi doted on the Little Bun. Therefore, Little Bun was very happy. He finally had a playmate who could play with him. Moreover, his playmate also liked to raise small animals. Spicy little Chui played so well with Yiya. Yiya, whose rabbit legs were about to cramp after being frightened by the poisonous snake for an entire day, was speechless. Little master, with which eye did you see that I was playing well with it? Little Bun's happiness lasted for a long time. Even when Dai and Yan Chiue came over at night to snatch Mama away from him, it didn't change his good mood. Little Bun lay in Xiao Qing's arms while Yiya lay on the pillow and pretended to be dead. For the first time, Little Bun didn't forcibly stuff Yiya between him and Xiao Qing. Instead, he wrapped his arms around Xiao Qing's neck and happily told Xiao Qing about what happened during the day. For example, Qin Zishi gave him delicious pudding and even lent him toys to play with. He even brought him to pick mushrooms. In short, Qin Zishi was a very good friend. Chapter 262. As he spoke, Little Bun tilted his head and asked Xiao Qing, "Can we live with Brother Xiao Shi in the future? I want to play with Brother Xiao Shi." Xiao Qing patted Little Bun's head and said gently, "No, only family members can live together. Qin Zishi has his family. After he finishes his business, he will leave. But if you like, I can bring you to play with him." Little Bun was a little disappointed. This was the first time he had met such a good friend, so he didn't want to be separated from him at all. He really wanted to sleep with him. But according to Mama, his friend would leave in the future. Why couldn't he be like Uncle Han Qing, like Dai, and live and sleep with them? Little Bun felt very troubled. He didn't want to be separated from his first friend, but Mama said that only family members could live together. Little Bun's head spun quickly. He bit his finger and twisted it in Xiao Qing's arms. Finally, he had a flash of inspiration. Wouldn't it be fine if he turned Brother Xiao Shi into his family? Just like Dai and Yan Chiue, who weren't his family in the past, weren't they sleeping with him now and even fighting over Mama with him? The more Little Bun thought about it, the more he felt that his idea was feasible. In the end, he fell asleep in a daze. Before he fell asleep, his mind was still thinking about how he was hugging left and right. On the left was Mama, and on the right was his new friend Qin Zishi. In his arms was Yiya. Life couldn't be better. When they woke up the next morning, Xiao Qing first dragged Yiya out from under the bed, then called the three of them to brush their teeth and wash their faces. As a new good man, Yan Hanqing was already cooking breakfast. Breakfast needed to be light and nutritious. Yan Hanqing cooked porridge with vegetables and shredded pork, accompanied by stacks of salted vegetables, and a boiled egg for each of them. Life was still very good. The shredded salted vegetables were stir-fried by Yan Hanqing. He added vermicelli and shredded meat. Then, he added peanut oil, stir-fried red chili, and added some fennel. It could be eaten directly as a dish. The aroma was so enticing that Cheng'an couldn't help but ask for a plate. Little Bun and Qin Zishi were currently in the honeymoon period. Early in the morning, he hurriedly scooped porridge and shredded pickles, added 2 more eggs, and sent it to Qin Zishi. When he came back, he was all smiles. Even his dimples were showing. He was still holding the little doll that Qin Zishi had given him. Xiao Qing was quite happy to see that Little Bun had a playmate. Especially when she saw Little Bun's cute expression, she couldn't help but rub her son again. After breakfast, the group continued on their journey. Before they set off, Qin Zishi gave everyone a pack of insect repellent powder. This powder would drive away mosquitoes when applied on the body. It was quite useful in the forest. This was already their second day in the forest, and they had traveled a long way. They didn't know whether it was due to luck or something else, but they didn't encounter a single mutant beast along the way. They didn't even see common pheasants or rabbits. Qin Zishi was a little discouraged, but he quickly recovered. After all, the forest was very big, and they were still at the edge. It was normal that they didn't encounter any animals. On the third day, they finally met their first mutant animal. It was a mutant wild cat. It was very fast, but it followed the habits of ordinary cats and ran away as soon as it saw people. However, they were still quite excited. At least they had begun to encounter mutant animals. When it was time to set off in the afternoon, Xiao Qin was the one who led the way. Gu Panpan walked in the front, followed by Xiao Qin. Dai and Gu Chuan were on the left and right respectively. Yan Hanqing and Gu Chuan were behind them. Xiao Tong was sandwiched between them. In this way, if Gu Panpan was in danger, Xiao Qin could react quickly and pull her back with the vines. Dai, who was good at close-range attacks, would fill in the gap. The rest were long-range attacks. As for Yan Qiue's position, it was all thanks to his shamelessness. Regarding this, Yan Qiue said that he would seize every opportunity to be with Xiao Qing at all times. After going deeper, Xiao Tong, who had the sharpest senses, sent a message that there was a strong presence ahead. Dai was also sensitive, so he quickly became alert. Xiao Qing trusted them very much, so she immediately signaled her friends to pay attention to the surroundings. She also became alert. After getting a little closer, Xiao Tong sent another message. There was more than one presence ahead, which meant there was more than one mutant animal ahead. Soon, Xiao Qin could even feel the ground under her feet trembling slightly. That was to say, there was a mutant animal running in front of them. Moreover, the mutant animal was heavy, so the ground trembled when it ran. She jumped on a branch on one side, so her field of vision widened. After crossing countless branches, Xiao Qin could see clearly what was approaching them. The ones approaching were cows. Judging from their appearance, they looked a little like rhinoceroses, but their horns were smaller than rhinoceroses. Their overall size was also a little smaller than rhinoceroses. 3 to 5 of these cows were running wildly, with a few wolves chasing after them. Normally, there should be very few cows in this kind of forest. However, after the apocalypse, all kinds of animals left their original habitats and fled everywhere. Some mutated animals were not restricted to the environment, so it was not strange to meet any kind of animals in the forest. Perhaps they would meet fish running on the ground, or rabbits chasing tigers, such as Yiya. Xiao Qin carefully looked at the wolves. Because they were too far away, she could not sense their levels. She could only make a gesture to her friends, telling them that something was approaching. Chapter 263. As the group of mutated animals approached, Xiao Qing remained motionless and carefully sensed their auras. In the end, she determined that these wolves were around level 3. If there was no better choice, these wolves could completely satisfy Qin Zixi requirements. After confirming, Xiao Qing released the vines and called for the others to hide. The herd of cows seemed to have mad cow disease, running around wildly. What if they hurt someone? Dai was the fastest. He picked up Little Bun and ran up a tree. Then, the others also hid. Only Cheng An's team was left standing there, confused. Little Bun quickly waved at Qin Zixi. Although Qin Zixi didn't understand what was going on, he followed his little friend when he saw him calling. Cheng entrusted Xiao Qing's abilities, so he also hid. The group of people hid in the trees and soon saw this scene. The cows were running wildly, and there was a lot of dust. The wolves were eating the dust and chasing after them. Xiao Qing released the cows. The herd of cows looked quite pitiful. One of them had been almost killed, and there was still a bloody paw print on its butt. After the bull passed by, the vines suddenly drilled out of the ground like a giant net, trapping the wolves in the center. With her current strength, dealing with a few mutated beasts around level 3 was simply a piece of cake, a matter that was as easy as flipping her hand. There were sharp thorns on the vines. Once the vines caught the wolves, they quickly pierced their skin and injected poison. The wolves struggled for a while before they were completely paralyzed. They lay motionless in the net. Yan Qiue and the others were used to Xiao Qing's strength. Although Cheng'an knew that Xiao Qing could lead someone like Gu Panpan, this was the first time he saw Xiao Qing's abilities. He couldn't help but walk over and poke the wolves in the net. He asked his question, "Are these level 3 mutated wolves?" Looking at their greenish-black fur and the green lightning mark on their foreheads that resembled Erlangshen's, one could tell that they should be wind-type mutated wolves. But, how could a level 3 mutated wolf not even put up a fight before being wiped out in one go? It was literally, catch them all in one fell swoop. Xiao Qing nodded and retracted the vines, leaving behind the 3 green wolves that were still twitching on the ground. She then said, 2 beginner level 3 and 1 mid-level 3. Their potential is not bad. At the very least, they won't have a problem growing to level 4. I've temporarily paralyzed them. Do you want to find a place to lock them up first? Qin Zixi was also a little stunned. How long had it been since they entered the forest? They only managed to capture 3 mutated beasts, and they were wolves with relatively high combat power among mutated beasts. More importantly, they didn't suffer any casualties, and they didn't even need to do anything. The little bun imitated Qin Zixi's serious expression and rode on Dai's neck. He reached out his little paw and stroked Qin Zixi's hair. Then he said, "They look fierce. They're not as cute as Xiao Chui. Do you want to keep them?" Qin Zixi nodded and waved at a beautiful girl beside her with an adorable look. The girl took out an iron cage out of thin air, and the other 2 paranormals moved the 3 wolves into the cage. Xiao Qing looked at Qin Zixi with a slightly deeper gaze. There were very few space paranormals. Because they didn't have the ability to protect themselves, many of them died in the early days of the apocalypse. The surviving space paranormals were in an awkward position in the base. Usually, when a powerful mercenary group went out on a mission, they would bring along a space paranormal. Chapter 264. After all, they had to find a place to store the materials they had plundered from the outside, as well as the things they had brought out. However, if the person with the ability to use space wasn't a close relative of the captain, it was inevitable that they would be suspected of embezzling the materials and the like. Therefore, paranormals with space were in an awkward position after the apocalypse. They were indispensable, but they were also suspected. However, Qin Zishi brought a paranormal with him when he went out, which was really bad. Besides, judging from the size of the cage, the paranormal space should be quite big. After all, he couldn't have brought only one cage with him. In addition to the cage, there should be many other things in his space. However, Xiao Qin just glanced at Qin Zishi. After catching the wolves, they had to set up camp on the spot. Even a paranormal with space power couldn't store living things in his space. They couldn't drag such a big cage forward, right? Therefore, Qin Zishi wanted to try to subdue the wolves. As long as he could subdue them, the wolves would listen to his orders. They wouldn't be a burden, and could even be helpful in the following journey. Therefore, they could only rest on the spot. They couldn't move forward until Qin Zishi subdued the wolves. Qin Zishi's power was very rare. At least, Xiao Qin hadn't seen another paranormal like him. During the process of setting up camp, Xiao Qin didn't stay on the spot. Instead, she carried the little bun and walked forward. Originally, they were going for a walk. Yiye had been trained to be very fierce. When it encountered small mutant animals, as long as the little bun gave the order, it would rush out. It didn't look like a rabbit at all, but more like a dog, pouncing on its prey. After walking for a short distance, Xiao Qin saw a small lake. It was more like a puddle than a lake. There might have been a fountain here a long time ago, and a lot of water gushed out from the ground. Later, the fountain was no longer active, but the puddle remained. The puddle was not small. Xiao Qin tried it and found that it was half a person's height. The water was very clear, and she could see the soil and gravel at the bottom. There were no creatures in the water, only a few aquatic plants. Thus, Xiao Qin was moved. She bit her fingertips and teased the surface of the water. She really wanted to go down and take a bath. After entering the forest, she had not taken a bath, so it was no wonder that when she looked at the pool of water, she was extremely moved. Xiao Qin thought about it carefully. There should be no one around except for the group of people, so as long as there was someone to keep watch, it would be relatively safe to take a bath. Thus, Xiao Qin gladly requisitioned Yiye. She threw Yiye out, then took out a carrot from her space and gave it to Yiye. If anyone comes near, remind me. If you do well, there will be carrots to eat tonight. Yiye stared at the carrot, almost drooling. It was only when Xiao Qin threw the carrot to it that it hugged the carrot and happily rolled on the ground. It then said that if anyone came, it would bark. Xiao Qin was very satisfied. She took Little Bun and went into the water with him. Little Bun liked the water very much. His two little legs kicked in the water, and his whole body floated up and down. Xiao Qin had no choice but to support his chubby little butt so that he could maintain his balance in the water. Probably because of their physiques, the two of them did not have much dirt on them. They just enjoyed the feeling of soaking in the water. Especially Little Bun. He hugged Xiao Qin's neck and kept asking, "Mama, why don't you call Yiye over? I want to give Yiye a bath." Chapter 265. Xiao Qin glanced at him, then turned her face away seriously. But when she turned away, she glanced at him again. At this moment, Yan Qiue was already taking off his pants. He bent down to tug at the bottom of his pants. The white underwear wrapped around his buttocks, and because he bent down, a little of his groin was exposed. It was very erotic. Xiao Qin instantly became very serious. She turned her head and said, "Go ahead and shower. I'll be your lookout." Then, she walked away. Yan Qiue was a little disappointed. Actually, he didn't want to shower. His original intention was to seduce Xiao Qin. However, when the little bun was around, Xiao Qin was too difficult to seduce. Thus, Yan Qiue hurriedly showered and got up. He put on his clothes, turned around a tall and strong tree, and saw Xiao Qin squatting on the ground and bullying Yiye. Poor Yiye. She was being bullied to the point of crying. Yan Qiue suddenly wanted to hug Xiaoqing from behind. He wanted to hug her slender waist and feel her slightly cold body temperature. Sometimes, Yan Qiue would also think, how did he fall in love with her? He was clearly such a selfish and heartless person. He could even be so ruthless to himself. How could he fall in love with a woman so wholeheartedly? Was it because she didn't discriminate against his special interests? Was it because of the gentleness under her indifferent mask when she faced him? It was both, but it wasn't. For some people, it was fate and also calamity. The moment he saw her, he gave his heart to her. Even someone like him couldn't escape from it. It was just that she was too good, so she attracted the attention of too many people. From Dai, to Yan Hanqing, to Gu Chuan, and even Fu Jingmo. Yan Qiue couldn't help but bite his fingertips. His eyes were a little red. God knew how much he wanted to kill all those who tried to get close to Xiaoqing. However, his rationality told him that he couldn't do that. The two thoughts crushed each other. Yan Qiue felt that he had already gone crazy. Perhaps love had this kind of magic that made him willing to suppress himself and do things for her that he would never do in the past. Unknowingly, Yan Qiue had bitten his fingertips until they were badly mangled. He quietly hid his fingertips, suppressed all the crazy thoughts in his heart, and leaned over. "Ah Qing, why don't we have roast rabbit tonight?" Yiya widened her eyes and looked at Yan Qiue. Demon! Bastard! It actually instigated its master's mama to get rid of it. Xiaoqing picked up the rabbit's tail and said affectionately, "Since it's so useless, I'll eat it." Yiya immediately curled up into a ball and whimpered while acting cute and pitiful to her master, begging for help. Little Bun pinched the rabbit's ears and said, "Mama, don't scare Yiya anymore. Look, it already knows its mistake." Yiya immediately hugged her paws and bowed pitifully and comically. Only then did Xiaoqing let her go and said, "Since we're all out, let's hunt some prey back and make dinner." Yan Qiue couldn't wait to spend more time with Xiaoqing, so he naturally wouldn't refuse. He pointed in a direction and said, "Let's go over there. The grass over there seems to be more lush." Xiaoqing nodded and led the two people and one rabbit over. They caught a lot of small prey back and threw them to the chef, Yan Hanqing, to handle. Unexpectedly, they also found a kind of walnut in the forest. However, after opening the shell, they found small black seeds that could be used as seasoning. Xiaoqing specially collected a lot of them to see if they could grow them when they went back. That way, they wouldn't have to worry about seasoning anymore. When it came to cooking, they ate separately. Yan Hanqing and the others had a portion, while Dai, Xiaoqing, and Little Bun had a separate portion. This was the food that Yan Qiue made after working tirelessly on it. It was food that could be digested by zombies. Although Xiaoqing could still only eat a small amount of food, she was very satisfied. More importantly, when there were so many people like Cheng'en and the others, Xiaoqing wouldn't be easily exposed. Of course, what made Xiaoqing most satisfied was that she could eat now. She didn't have to watch others eat and then vomit. After all, Xiaoqing was still a normal person psychologically. She really couldn't accept a life of fasting. Especially if she didn't eat for a long time, she would feel that she was mentally abnormal. Yan Qiue's research was successful in a timely manner. He actually made a kind of medicinal powder. The main ingredients were the nuclei and bones of mutated animals, as well as some special mutated plants. Then, when cooking, the powder would be mixed in. It would allow zombies to digest most of the food in their stomachs. The small portion that couldn't be digested would still need to be vomited out. While Yan Hanqing was processing the ingredients, Little Bun had already run to see his little friend. His little friend was still communicating with Green Wolf. His superpower seemed to be very powerful, as he could control more than one high-level mutated animal. However, the process of making it comfortable was very troublesome. Speaking of which, his superpower was also a spiritual power. The main thing was that he could communicate with mutated animals and use his spiritual power to leave a mark in their minds. Only then could he control them. Therefore, during the process of taming mutated animals, Qin Zishi faced a certain degree of danger. For example, if the mutated animal's spiritual power was very high, it would oppress his spiritual power and damage it. If it was serious, he might even become an idiot or directly die. The second thing was that all mutated animals were very wild and aggressive. He needed to be very close to them in order to communicate with them. Then, during the process of communication, he would constantly use his spiritual power to stimulate and conquer them. In the end, he would be able to tame them. In short, strong power was always accompanied by high risks. Chapter 266. Xiao Chui was a very poisonous creature, but it was only level 2, so Qin Zishi was not very tired when he subdued it. But now, there were 3 mutated wolves in front of him, and each of them was at the same level as him. One could imagine the difficulty of subduing them. Qin Zishi started subduing a level 3 mutated wolf. This mutated wolf had been struggling, and its mental strength had not stopped for a moment. Qin Zishi struggled for a few hours, and his forehead was covered in sweat, but there was still no progress. He could not help but feel a little disappointed. In theory, he could subdue level 3 mutated animals, but why was there no progress at all? Young master is busy. You can't disturb him. A woman's gentle voice came from outside the door, and Little Bun's timid voice said, "Can't I play with brother Xiaoxi?" "I won't make trouble," Qin Zishi rubbed his head and said, "Come in." He did not have any younger siblings since he was young, and Little Bun was very cute, so he especially liked Little Bun and doted on him like a younger brother. Little Bun ran in happily, and then saw a big wolf lying in front of Qin Zishi. Its claws were tied up, but it still looked very fierce. Little Bun sat obediently at the side, and then said softly, "I won't disturb brother Xiaoxi." "Brother, are you going to raise this ugly wolf in the future?" Qin Zishi tried his best to make his face look more serious, then patted Little Bun's head and said, "Yes, brother will raise them in the future." "Spicy, is it disobedient?" Little Bun looked at the ropes on the wolf, then wrinkled his little nose and said fiercely, "Mama, shrink the Spicy. If it's disobedient, beat it. If it's obedient, Spicy." Yaya was disobedient at that time, and then she was beaten up by Xiao Qin. Now, she was very obedient. Qin Zishi laughed and did not take Little Bun's words seriously. He moved a small stool for him to sit at the side, and then continued to study. They could not stay here forever. He had to subdue these wolves as soon as possible and leave this lousy place. When Qin Zishi started communicating with the wolf using her spiritual power again, the Little Bun hugged Yaya and looked at the big wolf obediently. The wolf was extremely ferocious. It bared its white teeth and saliva continuously flowed out of its mouth. Its mental strength fluctuated violently. Little Bun immediately glared at the wolf. His black eyes seemed to have no white in them as he stared at the wolf. A ferocious aura exploded from Little Bun's body. Qin Zishi originally thought that the wolf's mental strength was like a thick barrier, preventing his mental strength from going any further. But suddenly, the barrier disappeared, and his mental strength went deep into the wolf's mental strength without any hindrance, leaving a simple imprint. Qin Zishi was stunned. He had been grinding for hours without any progress. How did he suddenly succeed? No matter what, this was a good thing. Qin Zishi opened his eyes and tried to send out an order. The wolf immediately lay on the ground and wagged its tail obediently. Qin Zishi heaved a sigh of relief. It was not a dream. He had really subdued it. In Qin Zishi's eyes, Little Bun was a lucky star. He succeeded as soon as Little Bun came, so Qin Zishi did not say anything and hugged Little Bun and kissed him. Little Bun was very shy, then pouted and kissed back. He said shyly, "Brother Xiaoxi, are you spicy after you finish your business?" Qin Zishi patted his head. Brother will play with you first. Chapter 267. Things were progressing smoothly here, and Xiao Qing had also successfully broken through to the pinnacle of level 4. Although it was called a breakthrough, it was actually a matter of accumulating a lot of energy. Now, she only needed a catalyst to break through to level 5. Xiao Qing originally thought that Qin Zishi would need at least 3 days to tame the 3 wolves, but he took less than a day. The next morning, he led the 3 wolves out in high spirits. I've named them Little 1, Little 2, and Little 3. Qin Zishi patted the wolf with the highest level, then asked Little Bun gently, do you want to try riding it? Little Bun happily rode on the wolf. Xiao Qing couldn't help but sigh. Little Bun really forgot about his mother when he had a companion. Since Qin Zishi had already tamed the wolves, they continued moving forward. Actually, Qin Zishi was already satisfied with this trip, but since they were already here, it would be a pity to go back like this. What if they found a higher-level mutated animal that was more suitable for him? The wolf called Little One almost became Little Bun's personal mount. Little Bun was very happy sitting on it. Even Yaya, who had felt weak in the knees when she saw the big wolves, stood on the wolf's head valiantly. The group continued moving forward. After going deep into the forest for a certain distance, danger was everywhere, and the group became more and more vigilant. Xiao Qing was aiming for places where bears lived. According to the habits of bears, they looked for places where bears might live. They did indeed find a few bears, but unfortunately, the highest level was only level 2. Their combat power was a little low, and they were not suitable for Qin Zishi at all. Then, for a few days, they didn't find anything. On this day, it suddenly rained. The rain wasn't light. At first, it was just dripping rain. Raindrops fell through the gaps between the branches and leaves, hitting Xiao Qing's face. She raised her head, and within a few seconds, she felt the coldness of the rain. The rain tonight might be so heavy that they couldn't see if there were any beasts nearby. After all, the sound of the rain would cover a lot of other sounds. Xiao Qing and the others had no choice but to set up tents on the spot to shelter themselves from the wind and rain and to keep warm. In short, there was no way to continue moving forward this afternoon. Probably because of the rain, the sky was completely dark around 4:30 in the afternoon. Dark clouds covered the earth. The clouds were like a black curtain, covering their faces. The weather in the post-apocalyptic world had always been strange. One second it was raining, and the next second the rain was mixed with hail. Xiao Qing had to use vines to cover their tent to prevent the hail or rain from collapsing the tent. Another more painful thing was that they could no longer sleep in their sleeping bags, or else they might become water bags. Xiao Qing could only hold the little Bun in her arms and let him continue sleeping. The rain didn't stop for the whole night. It wasn't until 10 o'clock the next day that the weather slowly cleared up. When Xiao Qing lifted up the tent, she was stunned. The weeds on the ground were all blooming with small white flowers that spread far and wide. It was exceptionally beautiful. Because the ground was very wet, the soles of their feet were muddy when they stepped on it. Xiao Qing was still walking happily, especially when she saw those busy bees. Bees collected honey, and bears liked to steal honey. If they found a beehive, then if they were lucky, they might meet a bear. Because of the heavy rain, many snakes and insects were flushed out of their nests and laid across the road, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. Even a huge python was flushed out of a cave and curled up on the ground. Xiao Qing and the others didn't want to cause trouble, so they went around it. Chapter 268. Following the direction where the bees were flying, she could find the beehive. Then, Xiao Qing discovered that it was the same kind of tree. On the branches, there were beehives. Due to the large number of beehives, they looked like fruits hanging from the tree. Then Xiao Qing did something bad. She secretly plucked a beehive and smashed it to get a lot of honey, filling a small bottle full of honey. Dai almost got a bump on his head because of this. Xiaoqing and the others stayed nearby for the time being, waiting for bears to come and steal the honey so that they could catch them directly. Although this was a bit like waiting for rabbits to appear, it was already a very irrational choice to continue going deeper. No one knew what was in the depths of the forest. Instead of taking the risk, it was better to wait for a while. It would be best if they could catch a mutant bear, but if they couldn't, they could just leave the forest. Anyway, Qin Zishi's harvest this time was enough to satisfy him. Xiaoqing even planned to pluck all the beehives and drink the honey when they left, regardless of whether they could catch a bear or not. As expected, they didn't meet a bear. Instead, they met some small mutant animals. Although Qin Zishi was a little unwilling, they still had to return. 3 wolves opened up the path. Their auras were extremely fierce and were best used to open up a path. Usually, mutant animals with some brains wouldn't provoke them. Those without brains were usually weaker and didn't dare to provoke the powerful wolves. Little Bun rode on the wolf and had a lot of fun. There was a saying that went, "An unintentional willow grows a shade." They sincerely wanted to find a high-level mutant bear, but they didn't find one and had already given up. When they were about to return, they met a bear. The situation at the time was like this. Because it had been raining for several days, the ground was wet. Basically, after an entire day, the soles of their shoes could be covered with more than 10 centimeters of soil. Little Bun carried a jar of honey and rode on the wolf with Yaya, followed by Xiaoqing. When they stopped for lunch at noon, Little Bun put the honey on the ground, but when he came back after lunch, where did the honey go? The jar full of honey was almost empty. Little Bowsy was more stubborn. He grabbed the person and asked, "Did you steal my honey?" Little Bun felt a little wrong that he couldn't find an answer after asking around. Then, he blinked and saw a tail peeking out from behind the tree. The round, bulbous tail looked very cute. Little Bun couldn't help but pull it. It felt very good to the touch. Then, he pulled the bear out from behind the tree. The bear was sleeping soundly after eating waiting for you, but its tail was almost pulled off by someone. It howled and poked its head out from behind the tree, wanting to see who had the guts to pull its tail. Then, she saw the Little Bun. Little Bun was also dumbfounded. He had only seen a cute, soft, gray ball, and then he had grabbed a big black bear. The contrast was too great. Little Bun cried out and almost cried. On the other hand, Yaya was very loyal. Her first reaction was to jump up and kick the bear's face. The bear was caught off guard and was kicked to the ground by a rabbit. The sound of the bear landing was very loud and immediately attracted Xiaoqing's attention. When Xiaoqing saw this scene, she was scared out of her wits. Her little baby was sitting in front of the bear, looking at the big bear pitifully. Xiaoqing ran over without a word. She picked up the Little Bun and heaved a sigh of relief. Chapter 269. The bear was actually very innocent. After it ate the honey, it was so satisfied that it wanted to find a place to take a nap. It wanted to see if another jar of honey would appear in front of it when it woke up. Then, its tail was pulled. The bear was in so much pain that it cried out and woke up. Before it could see clearly who pulled its tail, it was kicked to the ground by a rabbit. There were so many twists and turns. After Xiaoqing picked up the Little Bun, she released the vines. This time, she couldn't trap the bear. The bear's fur was very thick. The thorns couldn't pierce through it at all, let alone inject the poison. More importantly, the bear was very strong. It stood up and the vines tied to its body broke one after another. The vines were very strong. Xiaoqing had used them to trap countless zombies and mutated animals, but the bear broke them easily. Fortunately, they were made of energy and wouldn't be damaged. Otherwise, Xiaoqing's heart would ache. Xiao Qing's heart was full of the little bun. She was worried that the little bun was hurt. In her anxiety, she took out a green fruit from her space and stuffed it into the bear's mouth. The bear was looking around slowly when the fruit filled its mouth. It chewed slowly. It tasted sour and a little sweet. Then, it collapsed. Xiao Qing wasn't in the mood to care about it. She quickly checked the little bun's body to see if he was hurt. She checked inside and out several times. When she didn't find any injuries, she heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, Xiao Qing finally reacted. Wasn't there a bear just now? The bear lying on the ground, she didn't know what she had stuffed into the bear's mouth. The bear was lying on the ground, looking like it was asleep. Xiao Qing touched the bear's head. When she didn't see any reaction, she grabbed the bear's paw and dragged it back. The people who were cooking and waiting for their food, I went out for a stroll and actually brought back a bear. Xiao Qing's expression was also a little strange. She felt that Qin Zixi life was really too good. He had always wanted a bear with thick skin that could be used as a meat shield. Then, when they were about to leave the forest, a bear delivered itself to their doorstep. Was Qin Zixi really not God's illegitimate child? Peak level 3. Do you want to subdue it? Xiao Qing asked with a strange expression. Qin Zixi's expression was also a little sluggish. After a while, he said, okay. However, there was no need to rush to tame the bear. They had to eat first. After the meal, Qin Zixi turned around to take a look. Her face was about to crack. The bear had been sleeping on the ground, but now its aura had suddenly become unstable. There was also a thick earthy yellow light shining continuously. It was clearly about to break through. Who had seen a captive about to break through at such a critical moment? Not only Qin Zixi, but even Xiao Qing felt that Qin Zixi was really lucky this time. Once this bear broke through, it would become a level 4 mutated animal. With the strength of a level 4 mutated bear and Qin Zixi's intelligence, it would be almost invincible among those of the same level. Even someone like Xiao Qing, who was at the peak of level 4, wouldn't dare to face Qin Zixi directly. Xiao Qing was silent for a long time. Then, she said, hurry up and subdue it. When it evolves to level 4 and wakes up, it will be very difficult for you to subdue it again. Qin Zixi knew that now wasn't the time to be polite, so he took the bear back. Thus, they could only set up camp. As soon as Xiao Qing returned to the tent, she immediately took out a green fruit from her space. This fruit was the one she had stuffed into the bear's mouth before. This was an unexpected harvest from the last time they were in the forest. She had kept both the vine and the fruit. Later on, some things happened that caused her to forget about this fruit. If it weren't for the fact that she had stuffed one into the bear's mouth, Xiao Qing would have completely forgotten about it. Was the bear's evolution related to this fruit? Xiao Qing called Yan Qiue over to let a professional check if this green fruit was poisonous. After a careful examination, Yan Qiue found that not only was the fruit not poisonous, but it also contained rich energy. Without hesitation, Xiao Qing called Air Dai over and stuffed one into his mouth. Air Dai was the weakest among them now. Although Air Dai couldn't speak, Xiao Qing could feel that Air Dai was sullen, which was why she had thought of giving the fruit to Air Dai first. Xiao Qing was worried that the whole fruit was too strong and that it might have side effects, so she first cut the skin of the fruit and squeezed out the juice. She diluted it with water and gave it to Air Dai to drink. If Xiao Qing gave Dummy something, even if it was poison, he would drink it. After Dummy drank a cup of diluted juice, his eyes brightened. A feeling of being close to a breakthrough broke out from his body. Dummy should have used the energy accumulated for a long time to fill the crystal nucleus so that he could proceed to the next step of the breakthrough. However, Dummy broke through just like that. He licked his lips, still wanting more. This breakthrough was too easy, and he didn't feel tired like he usually did. He just stared blankly for a while and then broke through. Xiao Qing didn't say anything and gave him a few more cups of juice. However, the effect of the second cup wasn't as good as the first. After Dai drank the juice from the whole fruit, he broke through to the mid-stage of level 3. But this was already very scary. If it weren't for this fruit, he might have needed a few months to reach his current level. Yan Qiyu watched the whole process. Then he asked quietly, "How many of these fruits are left?" Xiao Qing counted and said with a pained expression, "One was eaten by the bear, and one was eaten by Dai. Now there are 4 left." If she had known that the fruit was so effective, she wouldn't have given it to the bear. At that time, she was muddle-headed. She was afraid that the bear would bite Little Bun, so she casually took out something to bet on its mouth. Yan Qiyu had a headache. How should he divide the 4 fruits? Chapter 270. At that time, there were piles of bones under the vines. It seemed that many mutated animals had died there. Xiao Qing guessed that the nuclei of those mutated animals had been absorbed by the vines. That was how the fruits were formed. Then, there was a reason why the fruits could improve people's superpowers. It was simply a condensed form of nuclei. It was very difficult to find such a good thing. Xiao Qing had to hold on to the idea that she would not have the idea of distributing them after this time. Dummy had already eaten one, so he could be excluded. She could not favor the rest of the companions, could she? Therefore, the remaining 4 fruits had to be distributed equally. The rest of her friends were Gu Chuan and his sister, Yan Qiyu, Yan Hanqing, Xiao Tong, her and Little Bun. There were 7 of them in total. Oh, there's also a Yiya. If the fruits were distributed equally, they could be divided into 2 halves. Although the effect would be less, everyone could have a share. Xiao Qing thought for a while and turned the 4 fruits into juice. Then, she divided them into 8 cups and let Yan Qiyu distribute them. She gave the juice to Little Bun and Yiya first. After watching them break through, she drank the juice herself. Now that Little Bun was already at level 3, and even Yiya was a level 4 mutated rabbit. If anything happened, they would have the ability to protect themselves, and Xiao Qing felt more at ease. After drinking the juice, Xiao Qing took out a lot of crystals and held them in her palm. In case something happened, or she was about to break through but didn't have enough energy, these crystals could be used to support her temporarily. Actually, she was already on the verge of breaking through. She only needed a little help to break through this barrier, and she could break through to level 5. The fruits came at the right time. Xiao Qing quietly felt the surging power in her body. She clenched her fist. Power was a good thing, especially in this post-apocalyptic world. You could be unreasonable, but you couldn't be without a fist. Otherwise, don't even talk about protecting your family, you won't even be able to save your own life. Xiao Qing was very calm. Ever since she obtained her special ability, she had broken through several times. She could be considered to be very experienced. When the surging power surged up, she used her remaining mental strength to guide the energy in her body towards the crystal nucleus. When the turbulent energy came out of the crystal core, its volume would be smaller. After a few hundred times, all the energy was absorbed by the crystal core. Xiao Qing could clearly feel that an invisible barrier had been broken. The crystal core would usually only grow slowly, but now it had suddenly increased in size. The crystal core that was supposed to be a multi-sided rhombus seemed to have become a lot rounder. Xiao Qing had broken through. She felt the energy surging in her body for a while. Then, she opened her hand, and vines with endless vitality grew out. Originally, the vines were emerald green in color. Only the thorns on top were darker green. Now, the vines were as thick as a baby's arm. The whole body was dark green, as if it was carved out of black jade. It looked very fragile, like a fragile crystal. In fact, whether it was its toughness or toxicity, it had greatly increased. This was only one of Xiao Qing's gains. Her biggest gain was that she had a deeper understanding of space. Also, her small space had expanded in size. In short, there were many benefits. For a long time in the future, she probably wouldn't be able to break through. After all, from level 5 to level 6, it would take a long time to accumulate. After relaxing her body, Xiao Qing walked out. When she opened the curtain, she saw a group of people standing at the door. They were all staring at the tent attentively. Xiao Qing was shocked. Chapter 271. What are you doing? Yan Qiue's expression was a little strange. Qing, you haven't come out for a day and a night. If you didn't come out, I would have gone in to have a look. I broke through. Xiao Qing was in a good mood. She patted Yan Qiue's shoulder and said, that's why it took me a little longer. What about you? I'm at level 4 now. Yan Qiue couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. His level 4 power was much more powerful than that of ordinary paranormals. After all, his power was very strong. I'm at level 4 too, Yan Hanqing said. Then Gu Chuan, who had been silent for a long time, said, me too. Apart from them, Xiao Tong and Gu Panpan were now only one step away from level 4. It was estimated that they would break through soon. Even so, it was still very scary. Level 2 paranormals were the mainstream, level 3 paranormals were experts, and level 4 paranormals could be counted on one's fingers. However, in a paranormal team of less than 10 people, there were actually 4 level 4 paranormals and a level 4 mutated animal. Among the rest of the paranormals, the weakest was at least level 3. It would scare people to death if they knew about it. Moreover, among the level 3 paranormals, there was Little Bun, who was young and had great potential. There was also a psychic paranormal, which was very rare. Only Gu Panpan's paranormals were more common, but a strength-based paranormal like her was also very powerful. This team of paranormals was enough to defeat most mercenary groups. Xiao Qing was even confident that she could challenge one of the top 4 mercenary groups in the capital. Xiao Qing breathed a sigh of relief. Ever since the apocalypse, her heart had been in her throat. She was afraid that one day she would wake up and find that everything was just a dream, and she was lying in a pool of blood, watching the car that caused the accident speeding away. Even though this thought had faded away day by day, Xiao Qing didn't relax. Strength, strength, strength. Without enough strength, one could only be at the mercy of others in an environment like the apocalypse. Until today, she suddenly found that her friends were very powerful. Their strength had already stood at the top of the paranormals in the country. Only then did she feel relieved. Where's Qin Zishi? How is he? After relaxing, Xiao Qing suddenly remembers the important matter. If Qin Zishi can't tame the bear, a level 4 mutant bear will not be easy to deal with. Hearing his friend's name, Little Bun was the first to react. He's playing with Bear. Yan Qiue hurriedly continued, he's very lucky. He's already tamed that bear. After taming it, that bear broke through to level 4. He's so happy that he can't even keep a straight face. The strength of her companions had all increased by a level, and the employer was also satisfied. The mission this time could be considered to have been completed successfully. Xiao Qing was very satisfied. She brought people to discuss with Qin Zishi about returning. Qin Zishi was teasing the bear. The bear was very simple and honest. When he teased it, it rolled on the ground. When it was not baring its big white teeth, this bear was quite cute. Just as Yan Qiue said, Qin Zishi couldn't keep a straight face. His face, which was always serious, couldn't help but smile. A pair of small dimples appeared as he smiled. With some baby fat, he was even cuter than the bear. He had already gotten what he wanted the most, so he naturally agreed to go back. Therefore, this time, even their speed was much faster. Only Cheng'en wanted to cry. He originally thought that they would encounter some danger this time, or that there would be something that required his help. In the end, he won by lying down all the way. It was like he didn't exist at all. It wasn't until they were almost at the base that Chang'an realized that he had come this time to get paid. Chapter 272. The closer they got to the base, the more unhappy Little Bun became. He and Qin Zishi got along very well. Although there was a big age gap between them, Qin Zishi treated him very well. There was no generation gap between them, and they could play together. It could be said that they had formed a deep friendship. Then Xiao Qin told him that they would be separated when they returned to the base, because Qin Zishi was not from S-City base. Sooner or later, she would leave. Little Bun was especially unhappy. This was the first time he had such a strong desire to keep his little friend, but no matter how he thought about it, he couldn't think of a good idea. If he wanted to keep his little friend, he could only make him his family. Little Bun bit his finger and could not help but secretly ask Qin Zishi, "Brother Xiaoxi, do you like my mama?" Qin Zishi and the bear were inseparable these 2 days, except when they went to the toilet. At this moment, he was feeding the bear. Hearing Little Bun's words, the pure Qin Zishi's first reaction was that Little Bun was talking about the affection between friends. It meant that he had a good impression of her, so she nodded. "I do." Xiao Qin had outstanding abilities, was beautiful, and was not bad-tempered. This mission was so perfect because of her. How could he not like her? Little Bun laughed immediately. "I told you that my mama is so beautiful. No one would dislike her." After getting Qin Zishi's approval, Little Bun began to secretly plan a way to make Qin Zishi his family. Then they could eat together, sleep together, and live together. His little friend would never leave him again. Great! Xiao Qin didn't know about Little Bun's plan. She was trying her best to adapt to her level 5 ability. After breaking through to level 5, her strength had doubled. It didn't feel like she had broken through one level, but many levels. The 5th level was like a threshold. After breaking through, both the amount and quality of the energy in the body would be greatly improved. Not to mention the improvement in speed, physical strength, and strength. Xiao Qin needed a short time to adapt to better control her current strength. Not only her, but the other little friends were also adapting to their own strength. After all, if one didn't know how to use a greater power, it would be a waste of a heavenly treasure. It would be like a child who had obtained a treasured sword. In the process of adapting, they returned to the base. When they reached the gate of the base, Xiao Qin felt that something was wrong. When they got closer, they found that many cars were parked outside the base, and many injured people were getting out of the cars. Xiao Qin could not help but get out of the car and ask the guard at the gate, "What's going on?" The guard knew Xiao Qin. He had seen the bet between Xiao Qin and Chang'an, so he was very nice to Xiao Qin. "Didn't our base send some people to escort those researchers to the capital? Something happened. I don't know why, but it seems like it was premeditated. They were surrounded by a crowd of zombies. Now, all the bases have received the news and are sending people to rescue them. These injured people are from the last batch. More than 100 people went, but less than half of them came back." Xiao Qin could not help but frown. Those researchers were going to the capital to carry out important research projects, but now they were surrounded by a crowd of zombies. They might suffer a great loss, which was a great disadvantage for human beings. Moreover, the crowd of zombies would take the initiative to surround human beings, which meant that the zombies had evolved a lot during this period. They might have a higher IQ and started to target human beings. Chapter 273. That was really bad news. The gatekeeper said, there were a lot of zombies surrounding those researchers, and their levels weren't low. I heard that several nearby bases had sent people to rescue them, but the casualties were heavy. Only half of the paranormals who went came back. Among the half, many of them were injured. Those with minor injuries are fine, but those with broken arms and legs, how are they going to survive in the future? What should we do next? Did the base release any other information? Xiao Qing asked again. The gatekeeper sighed and said, if we don't send enough people, we'll be dead meat. So, our base chief and the base chiefs of other bases had a meeting, and then issued a task. Those who are willing to participate in the rescue can sign up. When there are enough people, we'll go to the rescue. But I'm afraid that those researchers won't be able to wait until we can wait until then. If they waited until there were enough people to go to the rescue, those researchers might have already become rotten meat in the stomachs of zombies. Now, many people have volunteered to go to the rescue. The gatekeeper touched his nose and said, but there are too few people, I'm afraid. Xiao Qing's brows were tightly furrowed as she brought her partners into the base. Qin Zishi was quite a nice person. He had just entered the base and had yet to gain a firm foothold, but he had already paid all the rewards to Xiao Qing and Cheng'an. In fact, because Xiao Qing had indeed helped him a lot this time, he even gave her an extra reward. Cheng'an wasn't jealous. After all, Xiao Qing's gains were proportional to her efforts. It could even be said that he had freeloaded all the way here. He received a reward for nothing and didn't have to do anything. What was there to be dissatisfied about? Xiao Qing took the reluctant little bun and said goodbye to them. Before leaving, Xiao Qing specially asked Qin Zishi, may I ask where your home is? When are you going back? Qin Zishi didn't hide anything from her friends who had battled with her. My home is in the capital. I'm going back in 2 days. Is there anything you need? Qin Zishi didn't bring the 4 pets back because he was worried that his pets would cause panic when they entered the base. Moreover, he couldn't stay in the base for more than a few days. Instead, he let them live outside the base. He was also worried that his pets would be killed by an unknown paranormal, so it was better to leave as soon as possible. It's like this. I'm going to participate in the rescue of that researcher. I'll probably set off tomorrow. If it's on the way, we can go together. Xiao Qing chuckled. When Qin Zishi heard this, he knew that Xiao Qing wanted to protect him again. After all, Xiao Qing's strength was obvious. When she said that she wanted to go with him, she was just being modest. She probably only mentioned it for the sake of little bun. Qin Zishi didn't say anything and showed a pair of small dimples. I can go whenever I want. Since you're going to participate in the rescue tomorrow, I'll go tomorrow too. I'm already worried about leaving Ada and the others outside. Okay. Let's meet at the square tomorrow at 8:00 in the morning. Xiao Qing agreed. The little bun immediately cheered happily. He had been thinking about making Qin Zishi his family along the way, but he didn't have a chance to do it. Now that Mama was going to go with Qin Zishi, he finally had a chance. In fact, Xiao Qing didn't want to see the little bun depressed. On the other hand, she wanted to return Qin Zishi's favor. After all, she took more than the reward from Qin Zishi. Because they only had one night to rest, Xiao Qing moved quickly. She first went to buy some fresh fruits and vegetables, then organized the space. Now that the space had expanded a little, she could put more things in it. After thinking about it, Xiao Qing put some things that she might use on a daily basis into the space, then went to sleep with the little bun and the others. The next morning, Qin Zishi took the initiative to come to Xiao Qing's house. At this time, Xiao Qing and the others were still eating, so they invited Qin Zishi to eat with them. Xiao Tong always liked almonds, so Yan Hanqing specially made some almonds for her as a snack. After breakfast, they set off again. Originally, the rescue mission was organized by the base, and they needed to gather a group of people before they set off. Xiao Qing didn't want to wait, and there would be more trouble if there were more people, so she directly took the team and left. Without Cheng An's team, half of the members were gone. The little bun specially invited Qin Zishi to play in his car. Soon after they left the base, Qin Zishi summoned the bear named He Bao, Ah Da, Ah Er and Ah San. One bear and 3 wolves ran behind the car. Those who didn't know better would think that they were being chased by mutated animals. When Qin Zishi got into Xiao Qing's car, he realized that the people sitting in the back seat were playing Fight the Landlord. He froze for a moment before he heard Gu Panpan call out to him, "Lil Shi, do you want to come and play with us?" Qin Zishi hesitated for a moment. His family was very good, and he went to a private school when he was young, so he had never been exposed to such down-to-earth poker games. Therefore, Qin Zishi was a little itchy. After the little bun called him once, he couldn't help but join in the game. After about half an hour, Xiao Qing turned around and saw that except for Gu Chuan, everyone's faces were covered with notes. So energetic. Xiao Qing smiled silently and turned her head back. She was sitting in the middle seat, leaning against the air die, and Yan Qiue was still massaging her legs. Her life was so rotten. Especially when Yan Hanqing and Yan Qiue were together, they specially made a lot of snacks for her. This greatly satisfied her. After a while, Xiao Tong would pass her snacks. Yan Hanqing's hands were very skillful. He also made a lot of biscuits with animal heads for the little bun, which made the little bun very satisfied. Chapter 274. When they were together, their life was not like that of the post-apocalyptic world. Qin Zishi was rich. Even in the post-apocalyptic world, he lived a comfortable life. As for Xiao Qing, she brought a set of kitchen utensils, seasonings, fruits and vegetables with her. Would she let herself live a bad life? Especially when the 2 groups of people were together, they were rotten to the core. Their life was like heaven. There was Yan Hanqing, who was more professional than a professional chef, and Qin Zishi provided the best ingredients. Other than that, Qin Zishi had many fruits and vegetables that were common before the post-apocalyptic world but rarely seen after the apocalyptic world. The girl with the space beside him was like a moving warehouse filled with all kinds of things, such as lychees, grapefruits, oranges, bayberries, pineapples. Qin Zishi had almost all of them in stock. Not to mention vegetables and the like. At the beginning, Xiao Qing was unwilling to take advantage of Qin Zishi. After all, brothers had to settle accounts clearly. Moreover, she and Qin Zishi were just friends who had just met. Therefore, Xiao Qing bought all the fruits that her friends wanted to eat but did not have. Qin Zishi was angry about this. He thought that he treated Xiao Qing and the others as friends, but Xiao Qing wanted to fob him off with money. However, Qin Zishi was born in an aristocratic family. He was not stupid. He understood Xiao Qing's thoughts. Therefore, he gave Xiao Qing more money every time they traded. He called it a treat for little bun. As for the 3 meals, most of the vegetables were provided by Qin Zishi. When it came to this, he refused to accept the crystals no matter what. Qin Zishi said that the dishes were for everyone to eat together, not him. Xiao Qing had to take care of him and keep this favor in mind. If there was a chance in the future, she would return this favor. This was how friendships usually developed. Moreover, although Qin Zishi was a little young and had a good family background, she was neither arrogant nor rash. She was quite lovable. Of course, the most important thing was that this was a world where appearances mattered. Therefore, after spending a few days alone together, Qin Zishi had already gotten along well with Xiao Qing's teammates. The more it was like this, the more reluctant little bun was to part with Qin Zishi. He was even more determined to make Qin Zishi his family. Don't you see that Aunt Panpan and the rest also like Qin Zishi? They would definitely be very willing to accept Qin Zishi as their family. Little Bun clenched his little fists and quickly formed a plan in his mind. The only thing missing now was for Qin Zishi and Xiao Qing to be alone together. Otherwise, Yan Qiue, the big bad guy, would definitely come out to stop them. Soon, they approached the place where the researchers were surrounded. These researchers were quite lucky. There was a reservoir nearby with a lot of fish. In order to prevent people from fishing, the person in charge of the reservoir specially surrounded it with a layer of iron net. After they were chased, they entered the reservoir. Several superpowered people with wood power planted a lot of poisonous vines on the iron net to form the first protective wall. Some superpowered people with earth power also strengthened the house and built a second layer of earth wall to form the second protective wall. Therefore, relying on these two protective walls, they were not torn apart and eaten by the zombies for a while. However, if it went on like this, they would be drowned by the tide of zombies sooner or later without water and food, and their supplies would be constantly consumed by the tide of zombies. Everyone in the reservoir couldn't sleep at night. They sent out signals for help while thinking of all kinds of ways to disperse the zombie crowd. Chapter 275. Originally, they had developed a kind of liquid that smelled good to humans. Once zombies smelled it, they would feel nauseous and leave voluntarily. They had come all the way from the south, and this liquid had saved their lives several times. However, this kind of liquid had no effect on the tide of zombies this time. Every zombie was staring at them fiercely, with no intention of leaving at all. Facing this situation, the researchers were completely panicked. There had been a rescue mission before. 200 to 300 people had come from several bases. These researchers and the remaining guards had wanted to take the opportunity to break out of the encirclement, but in the end, they did not make it out. Many of them had died, and more than half of the rescue team had died. What was more frightening was that they had found some very special zombies. These zombies had mixed in the tide of zombies. Judging from their appearance, they looked very much like humans. Only a part of them still retained the characteristics of zombies. Except for the fact that they couldn't speak, they looked no different from humans in terms of appearance. This made the rescue team even more panicked. Had zombies evolved to such a level? That was why those bases didn't dare to send a second wave of people to rescue them immediately. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a rescue mission, but a suicide mission. According to their preliminary guess, those zombies that looked like humans were likely to be at least level 4 zombies. There might even be level 5 zombies. When Xiao Qing arrived with her people, she saw many people wandering around nearby. They should be the scouts from each base, who had come to observe the situation. When she arrived, Xiao Qing hadn't expected that there would be so many zombies here. Just looking at the sea of corpses and moving heads, it was already very scary. The rotten smell of the zombies gathered together could be carried for 3 miles with the wind. Even if they were far away, it was still nauseating. Not far from the reservoir, there was an observation point set up by the bases. Xiao Qing led her people there. Before she arrived, Xiao Qing said, "Since we've come all the way here, it's time to part ways. I wish you a safe trip and return to the capital soon." Qin Zishi was very calm. "Who said I'm leaving? If I'm leaving, I'll take those researchers with me." He must have thought about this for a long time, or he wouldn't have said it so calmly. As soon as Qin Zishi spoke, the girl with no space beside him immediately said, "Young master, it's too dangerous here." "You'd better go home," Xiao Qing also said, "She's right. You should go home first. You can't change the current situation on your own. If you stay here for too long, your family will definitely be worried." Qin Zishi's expression was very serious. Her chubby little face was scrunched up into a ball. "I decided to stay after careful consideration. You don't have to persuade me, especially you, Sister Qing. You're already staying, so why do you have to ask me to leave?" There were 2 reasons why he didn't leave. First, his friends were all going into danger, and he couldn't go home alone to enjoy the peace and security. Secondly, he was also a citizen of the Celestial Empire. In the past, when he was weak, he could not do anything. Now that he was a level 3 paranormal and encountered such a situation, he naturally had to do something for the country. Of course, the first reason was more important. Xiao Qing patted his head and said, I don't want to nag you, but the current situation is really not suitable for you to be involved. Go home quickly. If there's a chance, I'll take the little bun to see you. Qin Zishi widened his eyes and said angrily, I'm already 17 this year. In a few months, I'll be 18. I'm not a child anymore. I know what I'm doing. Don't worry, Sister Qing, I won't be a burden to you. Chapter 276. Xiao Qing didn't want him to stay at all. This kid always claimed that he was almost 18 years old, but in fact, he was only 16 years old. His nominal age was 17, and he hadn't experienced much. It was too dangerous for him to get involved. Qin Zishi had a stubborn temper and refused to leave no matter what. Hence, they were in a deadlock, and Xiao Qing had no choice but to take him to the observation point to settle him down. The staff stationed in S City base in the observation point was having a headache. When he saw Xiao Qing and others come in, he quickly asked, has the rescue team sent by the base arrived? Xiao Qing shook her head, the base is still recruiting people. They shouldn't be here for a while. We came here spontaneously. What's the situation now? The man's eyes darkened and he was a little disappointed, but he still forced himself to be spirited and said, I've contacted the people inside. They can still hold on for a few days, but there's not much food left. After all, when they came out, they didn't bring much food, only enough to reach the capital. When they were besieged before, they lost part of it. Now there's less than a day's worth of food left. We're trying to find a way to transport the food in. With food, they should be able to hold on for 2 more days. As long as they can hold on for a few more days, they may be able to hold on until the base's rescue. But our food can't be sent in. Those zombies prevent anyone who tries to get close. We once tried to let people with space power sneak in with food. As a result, a high-level mutant zombie jumped out. Even the space power man couldn't come out alive. Another staff member added with a wry smile. Xiao Qing frowned and asked in a low voice, so now, is there any food? Yes. The staff member lifted the tarpaulin. There were all kinds of dry food under it. Although the dry food was not delicious, it could fill the stomach and save the lives of the people inside. Let me try. Xiao Qing thought for a long time and then said. Her physique was different. Although at the beginning, she had felt endless distress because of this physique, later, she felt more and more that her zombie-like physique had great benefits. For example, now she wouldn't be attacked by zombies, so she could bring in all the food. The staff member was stunned and hesitated. After all, he didn't know Xiao Qing's identity. What if she ran away with the food? This was the first reason. The second reason was that if Xiao Qing was not strong enough and died in the zombie crowd, wouldn't they lose a lot of food? He didn't want Xiao Qing to die in vain. Xiao Qing just showed the badge of a paranormal in the S-City survivor base and said, I have a special ability that can make the zombies not attack me for a short time. Let me have a try. I can't just watch them starve to death. The staff discussed and agreed. Looking at the situation, it would take a long time for the rescue team to arrive. By the time the rescue team arrived, the people inside would starve to death before they were eaten by the zombies. They didn't have any other way to bring the food in. It was better to trust Xiao Qing this time. The only problem now was how to bring the food in without exposing her space. Qin Zishi was very considerate. He patted his chest and said, Sister Qing, I'm a space paranormal. I'll lend you my space paranormal. I wish you success. Xiao Qing was very happy about his trust. She looked at the thin girl and said, Don't worry. I'll bring her back safely. After the discussion, it was decided that Xiao Qing, Dai, and the space paranormal named Lon would go in together. The more people there were, the more cumbersome it would be. Chapter 277. As for Dai, as a zombie, he would not be attacked and could even help them. After confirming the people going in, Lon put all the food into her space and was carried by Xiaoqing. After all, she was only a little stronger than ordinary people, but she did not have any other ability to protect herself. Once she entered the zombie crowd and was separated from Xiaoqing, she would die. Therefore, Xiaoqing directly carried Lon on his back. She was going to let Dai carry her, but Dai, who was always obedient, suddenly lost his temper and refused to touch Lon, making the scene very awkward. Xiaoqing had no choice but to carry Alan on his back. Due to the lack of time, Xiaoqing only told a few men to take good care of Little Bun and the others, and then resolutely entered the zombie crowd. When approaching the zombie crowd, Lon was a little scared and her body tightened. Soon, she found a very strange thing. All the zombies acted as if they did not see them. Occasionally, one or two zombies would turn around and stare at her, and when they approached, Dai would glare at them and run away. Lon was stunned. Since the end of the world, she had never seen such a scene. People were afraid of zombies, but zombies were not afraid of people. The deeper they went, the more zombies there were. Many zombies smelled the scent of living people and turned their heads towards Lon. Dai immediately bared his big white teeth and stared at those zombies fiercely. Dai was close to the high level of level 3. Although there were many level 3 zombies in this zombie crowd, Dai was born with a fierce aura. Ordinary zombies would avoid him when they saw him. Moreover, Xiaoqing was at level 5, so no zombies would dare to come over. However, the deeper they went, the more Xiaoqing found that something was wrong. Although most of the zombies in the zombie crowd were at level 3, and some were at level 2. There were no level 1 zombies at all, but this zombie crowd should not have almost wiped out the rescue teams of the major bases. Then there was only one explanation. There were higher level zombies hiding in the zombie crowd. Xiaoqing observed carefully and soon saw a little girl standing in the zombie crowd not far away. The little girl looked to be about 8 or 9 years old. She had a head of long black hair that was draped over her shoulders. She was wearing a pink princess dress that was a little dirty. She was also holding a teddy bear in her arms. The bear should have been brown, but because it was stained with too much dust and blood, it had turned dark black. At a glance, it looked more like an ordinary little girl who had been separated from her family. However, when the little girl raised her face, Xiaoqing realized that her face was very delicate and pretty. It was round and chubby with a tinge of pink. However, there were only holes left in her eyes. In the black holes, 2 glass-like eyes were burning with a layer of flames. Only this could let others know that she was not a living person. The little girl seemed to have felt Xiaoqing's gaze. She grinned and showed her jagged teeth. She was very fierce, and her strength was very high. Xiaoqing could not help but take a deep breath. Was this the mastermind of this zombie crowd? If so, this zombie crowd would be very dangerous. Zombies at this level should have high intelligence, and they led so many zombies. It was definitely not easy to deal with them. Just when Xiaoqing was deep in thought, the zombie had disappeared. She frowned and continued to move forward. Soon, she saw a second zombie that was different from the others. That zombie was an adult man. He was dressed like a white-collar worker and wore a pair of glasses. He looked more like a living person than the little girl zombie. Chapter 278. However, its collar was open, and there should have been a heart in its chest. Now, there was only a rotten black hole. Through the black hole, one could see its empty body. There was not a single piece of internal organs inside, but there was an infant zombie, looking outside with its head. The baby zombie was wrinkled and looked like it had just been born, but the surface of its body was bluish-black. It was also smiling at Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing felt cold all over. These two zombies, their strength was not lower than the little girl zombie. If she fought the little girl zombie alone, she could still win, but with these two zombies, she was afraid that she would be the one to die. Xiaoqing could only bite the bullet and walk in. Fortunately, until she approached the reservoir, she did not see any other high-level mutant zombies. When she arrived at the reservoir, Xiaoqing was worried. How should she get in? The outermost layer of barbed wire was covered with vines, and there were small flowers on the vines, which looked very green and beautiful. With Xiaoqing's eyes, she could see that the vines were not only poisonous, but also highly poisonous. And if she rashly climbed over the wall, she would be regarded as an invading zombie, right? Xiaoqing thought about it and decided to climb over the wall, but the way she climbed over the wall was special. The vines grew from the ground and formed an upward vine pillar, sending Xiaoqing and the other two into the air, and then she jumped in. In the next second, the patrolman shouted, "Enemy attack! There are zombies climbing over the wall." Then a group of people came out of the second layer of the wall, all of them were highly alert and ready to use their powers. Xiaoqing, she slowly raised her hand and said, "I'm just here to deliver supplies." In fact, the people inside had already run out of food. In the morning, they had eaten their last meal and were already prepared to starve. Then, they starved for less than an entire afternoon. Before the sun had even set, the supplies had already arrived. It was really fast. Xiaoqing calmly asked Alan to take out the food and water, and then comforted them. Several major survival bases have been discussing countermeasures. Before I came, I had already heard that they were gathering people to try to carry out a second rescue. Don't worry too much. A group of people in white coats who looked very embarrassed came out, and he quickly said, "Thank you very much for taking the risk to deliver the food. Let's sit inside first." Xiaoqing nodded. She took Dummy and Alan to follow these people in. She was sensitive to the fact that these people were like birds startled by the twang of a bow. Everyone's faces were filled with deep exhaustion and fear. However, Xiaoqing just thought that they had been besieged for a long time and were physically and mentally exhausted, and did not think in other directions. Until she sat down, Xiaoqing found that there was something wrong with the number of people. The news from the base was that there were a total of 30 researchers, and they had been carefully protected. Even if several of them died because of the zombie tide, there were still about 25 people left. However, Xiaoqing counted again and again, and there were only 25 people in this group. She couldn't say that all the members of the guard group were dead, right? Only the researchers were left. However, the leader of the researchers did not mean to talk more. He just asked Xiaoqing, "Miss, how did you get in here?" There were zombies outside, but Xiaoqing and the others could still enter the reservoir unscathed. They couldn't help but wonder. Xiaoqing smiled and said vaguely, "I have a special ability that can temporarily not be detected by zombies, but this ability can't protect too many people." Chapter 279. It was not that Xiaoqing was too vigilant, but it was the end of the world. Even in peacetime, there was a saying that one should not reveal their wealth, not to mention the end of the world. There were so many people sitting here, and no one knew what they were thinking. Moreover, her and Dai's identities must not be exposed. After Xiaoqing finished speaking, a few people's eyes revealed a strange light. They looked at Xiaoqing with a strange, eager, and indescribable feeling. Xiaoqing felt uncomfortable being stared at. The researcher who spoke first quickly glared at those people and said, "It's almost dark now. You must be tired from delivering the supplies. Why don't you take a rest first? Someone will keep watch at night, so you don't need to worry. You should rest well." Xiaoqing felt a little strange, but she didn't say much. She took Lan and Dai to rest. She saw clearly that the person with the highest status in this group should be the one sitting in the center. He was older, with wrinkles on his face, and looked a little old-fashioned. The one who kept talking should be his assistant. However, Xiao Qing was too lazy to ask too much. She took Dai and Lan to rest. A paranormal took them to a room and said coldly, "Don't come out at night if there's nothing wrong. It's dangerous outside." Then he left. There was a feeling of something wrong everywhere. Xiao Qing didn't want to think more, but she couldn't help thinking more than usual. After the three of them stayed in the room for a while, someone brought in some hot dry food. They had been trapped for a long time, and someone brought them food. They should be more energetic. However, whether it was the person who led them here or the person who brought them food, they all looked tired, cold, and desperate. After a simple meal, Xiao Qing told the two people, "I feel something is wrong. We should be careful at night. After all, the situation is special now. We don't know what will happen at night. Lan, you go to sleep. Dai and I will keep watch at night." Lan nodded obediently and quickly got into the quilt. But after a while, she sat up with the quilt and said with a bitter face, "I can't sleep. When I close my eyes now, I see the zombie crowd outside." Xiao Qing smiled and put a stool at the door. "I'll keep watch here. If there's anything, I'll inform you. Go to sleep." Lan turned over and over. After a while, she covered her head with the quilt and curled up. Xiao Qing leaned against the back of the chair. As soon as she sat down, Dai rushed over and hugged Xiao Qing's waist intimately. He hadn't been alone with Xiao Qing for a long time. Since the last time he came back, there was an annoying Yan Qiue beside Xiao Qing. He had been fighting with him for Xiao Qing. Humph. I hate Yan Qiue the most. He wants to snatch everything. Even half of Xiao Qing's bed was occupied by him. Therefore, Dai was very happy that he could be alone with Xiao Qing this time. Finally, they could spend some time together. As for Lan, he had completely ignored her. Xiao Qing sighed helplessly and caught Dai, who rushed over. The space in the chair couldn't accommodate two people, so Dai curled himself up in Xiao Qing's arms. This posture was too uncomfortable. Xiao Qing pouted her lips. "There's another seat over there. Sit by yourself." "Why are you sitting on my lap?" Dai pretended that he didn't hear her and curled up obediently. Fortunately, his body was soft. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to do it. After all, he was a man with a relatively broad frame. Even if he looked a little younger, his frame wasn't small. Xiao Qing didn't want to scold Dai, so she had to indulge him. They kept this posture until late at night. Xiao Qing, who was a little sleepy because Dai was in her arms, suddenly heard a shrill scream. Chapter 280. This voice was clearly from a woman, and it was filled with despair and fear. Xiao Qing remembered that she had seen two women during the day. One was ordinary and hard to remember, while the other was wearing a white coat and following beside the old man. She looked quite delicate and pretty. As soon as the voice rang out, Lan, who was not sleeping deeply, immediately woke up. She looked at Xiao Qing with a panicked expression. When she saw Xiao Qing's calmness, she miraculously calmed down a little. The three of them hurriedly went out the door and followed the direction of the voice. They lived a little further away from the scene of the incident. When they arrived, there were already many people there. Everyone's face was filled with deep despair. Xiao Qing walked to the front of the crowd. Then, she saw a woman in a white coat with a delicate face sitting on the ground with a pale face. Her face was covered in cold sweat, and even her facial features were twisted into a ferocious look because of deep fear. Not far in front of her was a corpse. It should have been a corpse that had died not long ago, because the corpse was still steaming. The reason why the corpse was steaming was because the skin below the neck had been peeled off, revealing a blurry layer of flesh and the texture of the muscles. The corpse's limbs were all twisted beyond recognition. His stomach was also cut open. His intestines were pulled out very long and wrapped around his neck several times. It looked like he had strangled himself with his intestines. The only thing that was intact was his head. His face was filled with horror and deep despair. His tongue was pulled out very long, broken, and stuffed back in. The old man squeezed through the crowd and walked in. Beside him was the middle-aged man who had spoken during the day. He glanced at the tragic corpse on the ground with a serious expression. After a while, he said, "Take it down and bury it. Everyone, go back to sleep." Xiao Qing was slightly puzzled by his calm reaction. At this time, shouldn't they investigate? At the very least, they should investigate the cause of his death and then raise their vigilance. And this old man seemed to be used to this kind of scene, unless, in these days of being surrounded, similar things had happened so many times that they even knew who was the one who did it. However, if it was the zombies outside who had the ability to come in, why didn't they rush in and kill all of them instead of killing them one by one? This was not in line with the habits of zombies. If it was a human, it would be even more unreasonable. If they knew who the murderer was, they could just catch him. If they didn't know, they could at least investigate. In short, this kind of situation was too wrong. Before Xiao Qing could figure it out, the woman sitting on the ground suddenly attacked. She pulled at her hair as if she had gone crazy. Her eyes, which were dilated because of fear, were particularly empty. With resentment, she stared at Xiao Qing and screamed, "It's them. They must have brought the demon in. Otherwise, why would those monsters come in?" As she spoke, she covered her face. Only her eyes were exposed from the gaps between her fingers. She looked at Xiao Qing and others with resentment. The crowd immediately began to whisper. They seemed to have forgotten that it was Xiao Qing who brought the food. Everyone looked at Xiao Qing with strange eyes. After being besieged for so long, the pressure, despair, and the approach of death had almost driven them crazy. The old man frowned and whispered, "Enough. Don't talk nonsense. Qing Mei, you take and ran back. She is frightened. You have to appease her." The ordinary-looking woman responded and stepped forward to help the woman named Anran. Anran had probably collapsed. She covered her face all the way. She just looked outside through the gaps between her fingers. Her mouth was still muttering something. Chapter 281. When she passed by, Xiao Qing could hear what she was saying. Anran was muttering, "They came to collect the debt. None of them can escape. None. None of them can escape." Xiao Qing couldn't help but feel goosebumps all over her body. She only felt that everything here was strange. These people seemed to know the truth, but it also seemed that no one knew. They were already in despair, already crazy, already on the verge of collapse. The old man walked over. He seemed to want to smile, but because he had always maintained a cold expression, it made his smile look especially awkward. It was like a fake smile. "I'm sorry. You guys should go back and rest. It's almost dawn." Alan seemed to want to ask something, but Xiao Qing grabbed her hand and said, "Old mister, you too, will go back first." He looked at Dai and then left with the middle-aged man. Xiao Qing also went back with Dai and Alan. At this moment it was already 3 o'clock in the morning. It was the most sleepy time of the day, but the three people were not sleepy at all. As soon as they returned to the room, Alan couldn't help but ask Xiao Qing, "Why didn't anyone check it? Why do they all seem to be used to it? Why is the whole thing so weird?" Xiao Qing patted Alan on the shoulder. There were a lot of guesses that she couldn't tell her, so she just said, "The situation is special now. What we have to do is to wait quietly and wait for rescue. There are some things that the more you don't know, the safer it is. You go back to sleep, it's almost dawn." Ah Lan's shoulders softened, and she sat on the bed, but she didn't sleep. She just curled herself into a ball. Xiao Qing sighed. She had a terrible headache. She let air die and stood in front of the window, her mind in a mess. Since she couldn't fall asleep now, Xiao Qing thought about the whole thing from beginning to end. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that something was wrong. In the end, she was too lazy to think about it. She leaned her head on Air Dai's shoulder and began to think about leaving. The rescue team should arrive in a few days. After completing this task, she wanted to bring Air Dai and the others to the south. The climate in the south was mild and suitable for the growth of plants. She wanted to travel there and look for high-level mutated plants to fill the gap in her hands. The next day, those people returned to normal. Although they still looked very dispirited and hopeless, they were much better than last night. When Xiao Qing was eating, she also looked around, but she didn't see Ran, nor did she see Qing Mei. Presumably, she hadn't recovered yet, so it was inconvenient for her to come out and eat. The whole day passed in a daze. At night, as Xiao Qing expected, another person died. This time, the one who died was a little older. His death was particularly tragic. His body was hung on a tree, and his internal organs and other things were hanging outside. What was even worse was that his two eyes were dug out and stuck on a branch next to him. The atmosphere of despair surrounding the people became more intense. Everyone seemed to be lingering with death. Xiao Qing couldn't help but frown every time she saw it. In the blink of an eye, Xiao Qing lived here for 3 days and witnessed 3 tragedies. After these 3 tragedies were summarized by Xiao Qing, she found the following similarities. First, the deceased were all researchers. Everyone was wearing a white coat. Second, they all died very miserably. They were all tortured to death. Although there were many doubts, Xiao Qing couldn't figure out who the homicidal maniac was. It wasn't until the 4th day that the news came in that the rescue team had assembled and was about to come. Even if such good news came, these survivors were not very excited because of it. However, the zombies seemed to know that the rescue team would arrive soon and finally launched a general attack. Chapter 282. The zombies were going to attack the reservoir. As soon as the news came back from the patrol team, everyone entered a state of readiness. Don't look at the number of people left here. There were not many, but many of them were researchers without the strength to truss a chicken. Many of them had no abilities. Even if they had abilities, most of them were brain mutations. For example, making their memory better. They had no fighting power at all. Therefore, the heavy responsibility was shouldered by the remaining guards. Everywhere was filled with the gloomy atmosphere of a coming storm. Xiao Qing walked around in a circle. Everyone was preparing for war. Only Ran was not. She was crazy. Every day, she would sit by the window, holding a small flower, staring blankly at the sky. Sometimes, she would look at the earth wall and murmur a sentence or two. Qing Mei was also a person with abilities. In order to prepare for war, she was not by Ran's side. Xiao Qing stopped by the window and could not help but look at Ran. Ran looked at Xiao Qing with a pair of dark eyes. After a long while, he said, "It's all retribution." Xiao Qing frowned slightly. She always felt that Ran also knew a lot. She lowered her voice and asked, "The murderer, who is it?" It's the devil." Ran found it difficult to suppress the fear in her eyes. She grabbed Xiao Qing's arm in a panic and said, "Go, run, the devil is coming." Then she began to walk around the room shouting the words, "The devil is coming." Xiao Qing crushed the small flower in her hand. Her thoughts were very complicated. During the day, the zombies would not attack. They were also gathering and accumulating strength. When the sun went down, it was estimated that it would be time for them to really attack. When Xiao Qing came out, she promised to take Lan back. So she told Lan many times that she must not leave her side. Erdai was very obedient. Knowing that her mind was in a mess, he massaged her temples and shoulders. When Xiao Qing was about to fall asleep with her eyes closed, he secretly kissed Xiao Qing's forehead. Finally, at night, the attack of the zombies was about to begin. These people, compared to the zombies outside, were simply pitiful. They had already sent out a distress signal. As long as they could hold on until the reinforcements arrived, there would still be a chance. Xiao Qing was now worried that Yan Hanqing and the others would barge in. After all, she was still inside. If they were impulsive and really rushed in, it would be bad. At that time, no matter what kind of damage there would be, it was not something Xiao Qing wanted to see. Now, she could only pray that Yan Hanqing and the others would listen to her and obediently join the reinforcements. As soon as the sun went down, the zombies began to attack. They destroyed the first defense. Xiao Qing took Erdai and Lan to join the rest of the people. They saw with their own eyes how the zombies destroyed the first defense wall. It was completely pushed down by violence. But there was a problem. They obviously had the ability to push down the defense wall. Why did they just surround and not attack? However, at this point, no matter how many doubts there were, they could only put aside for the time being. The old man organized the rest of the researchers and began to retreat in an orderly manner. The second defense wall could not last long. They had to retreat into the house and rely on the building to fight with the zombies. They retreated into a large warehouse. They did not know what it used to store things. Anyway, it was very empty now, and the ground was covered with dust. As soon as they came in, they sealed the door first, hoping to hold on for a while. Soon, the zombies broke the second defense wall. They could even hear the zombies' claws constantly scratching the wall. Chapter 283. The rustling sound made people feel very uncomfortable. The group of people in the warehouse were frightened. Soon, the windows suddenly broke, and a black shadow came in. Immediately, countless superpowers were aimed at it, as if they wanted to tear it apart. However, it was very fast. It directly went into the crowd, grabbed the neck of a man in a white coat, and began to bite. Xiao Qing saw it clearly. It was a young male zombie. It had shark-like teeth, but its appearance was infinitely similar to that of a human, except that it was blind in one eye. The man in the white coat didn't have any superpower at all, so he was bitten to death in an instant. It jumped up and targeted the old man. When it jumped up, it screamed shrilly, and its voice was full of resentment. Then, it ignored the others and directly rushed to the old man. The old man was very calm. He counted and then said, 04796, Fire Superpower Possessors, go. A Fire Superpower Possessor walked out. As soon as the fireball in his hand fell on the zombie, it screamed and its skin seemed to be on fire. A high-level zombie like it shouldn't be so afraid of fire, but it was as if it was on fire. It happened so fast that many people didn't have time to react. By the time they reacted, the zombie had already escaped through the window. At this moment, Xiao Qing's face was expressionless as she looked at the window. She suddenly connected everything together, and the answer she received shocked her. However, she was just guessing. There were some things that she couldn't confirm. Hiding in the warehouse, there were fewer places where they had to face zombies, so they were much safer. However, it was also very difficult to defend. Once they were broken through, they would die. There was nowhere to run. After driving away the zombie, the whole warehouse fell into silence. After a long time, a voice was heard. That's 04796. The old man suddenly raised his head and looked at the speaker. Then, his face changed. Yi, now is not the time for you to talk nonsense. The man named Yi was a very thin young man wearing glasses. He looked weak, and his face was very pale. However, his words were very cold. I tried to persuade you many times, but you didn't listen. Now, it's all karma. Lu Dong, believe it or not, if the warehouse is broken, you will be the last one to die, because they don't want you to die. The old man, who was Lu Dong, suddenly became very angry. He said coldly, Yi, do you think you are a good person? I'm not a good person, but anyway, I didn't experiment on living people. Yi smiled and then said, now, they are back for revenge, Lu Dong, I'm watching. Shut him up. Lu Dong suddenly turned his head and looked at Xiao Qing coldly. Immediately, someone covered Yi's mouth and dragged him to a corner to calm him down. Xiao Qing suddenly understood. She was wondering why there were suddenly so many high-level zombies with different appearances. Why those zombies would surround them and kill them every day, but they didn't break through in one go. He also understood why those people had died so miserably. One sentence explained everything. Using living people for experiments. Japan used to like to do human experiments. However, before the apocalypse, when it was still peaceful, such experiments were forbidden. Once discovered, they would be attacked by other countries. But after the apocalypse, when there was no one to restrain those people, they actually did human experiments without any scruples. Listen to the number, 04796. That meant that before it, there were at least 4,795 experimental subjects. Where did so many experimental subjects come from? All of them were living people. These people are insane. Xiao Qing's eyes were cold. When she looked at those people again, it was as if she was looking at dead people. It was too disgusting. How could they do such a crazy thing? Thinking of those strange zombies that they met on the way here, there was a little girl among them. This could no longer be described as crazy. They were simply a group of beasts. No, they were worse than beasts. Miss Xiao Qing, please go over there. Two people came over and said, please, but their eyes were threatening. Xiao Qing didn't resist. She had to make things clear first. Dumbo, Xiao Qing and Lan were invited to Yi's side and watched over as if they were under house arrest. Yi hugged his legs and calmly looked out the window at the zombies baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. Because the glass was broken, they had to attack to fill the gap so that the zombies couldn't come in through the window. So they held on for a few more hours. Yi sneered and closed his eyes. He was too lazy to look at them. Xiao Qing saw that those people didn't have time to care about them, so she asked in a low voice, can you tell me, those things? Yi looked at her expressionlessly, are you curious? Xiao Qing didn't say anything. She just looked at Yi. Yi bit his nails and said after a while, I'm a researcher. I used to be the deputy director of the institute. Later, because I strongly opposed human experiments, I'm nothing now. But I couldn't stop them from carrying out such a crazy experiment. In the third week after the apocalypse, they carried out their first experiment. All the people used for the experiment were survivors. They caught zombies and bit the survivors, then observed the process of them turning into zombies and recorded it down. That was the beginning. Later on, they became crazier and crazier, and they became more and more unrestrained. Not only ordinary people, but also some paranormals who had just awakened, some paranormals who weren't very strong, or some paranormals who had special abilities and weren't very valuable, became their experimental subjects. Chapter 284. In the first batch of ordinary people who were captured, the oldest was 70 years old, and the youngest was only 1 year and 3 months old. There were 2 pregnant women in the middle. At that time, I strongly opposed this experiment, so I was locked up. They wanted me to reflect. Yi sneered and said, when I finished my reflection, the first experiment was already done. At that time, they were calculating the results of the experiment, and those who had turned into zombies were still lying on the experiment table in pieces. Even the pregnant women and children were the same. The pregnant women and children were taken out to do the experiment alone. At that time, they recorded that the younger the child, after being infected, the more likely it was that the mutated zombie would have special abilities. After the pregnant women were infected, their bodies would quickly die, and the energy would be supplied to the child in their bodies, causing the child to undergo a second mutation. Speaking of this, his eyes were already red. I remember many years ago, when I was still a student. At that time, I thought that all the knowledge I had learned could be used to serve the country. But later, I found that I had become an accomplice. I could do nothing but watch those people. What happened later? Xiao Qing was very calm, but her body was full of murderous intent. The reason why she didn't explode yet was that she wanted to know all the facts to decide what to do next. After a long time, they began to be dissatisfied and began to use paranormals for experiments. These paranormals were against the base chief at that time, and some of them were useless because of their special abilities, so they were all sent here. As we all know, paranormals can't be infected, but they used some unknown means to transform and infect paranormals. After the experiment, some paranormals retained the vitality of humans, and some of them were poisoned by zombies. What's more, they not only retained the ability of zombies, but also retained their abilities. One of the paranormals was pregnant, and after the experiment, they cut open her belly and got a half-zombie baby. This baby actually had the ability to control other zombies. They were ecstatic and wanted to create a zombie king to control all the zombies in the world, but retribution was not good. Those transformed paranormals all retained a certain degree of consciousness, and when they found the opportunity, they escaped, and then launched their revenge. The entire base was destroyed. Lu Dong saw that the situation was not good, so he secretly escaped with his people and contacted the research institute in the capital, but he didn't expect that those experimental subjects would follow us. You all know what happened next. Yin Yi was a little dispirited. He should be suffering from the pain of being able to see but not being able to save them. After a long time of torment, he was so thin that only his bones were left. Xiao Qing patted him on the shoulder and was stunned. She glanced at Yin Yi again but didn't say anything. Yin Yi was hiding something, and Xiao Qing knew that. But everyone had their own secrets, so she didn't want to ask. The biggest problem now was that she didn't want this group of beasts with human faces to reach the capital alive. It was better for such disgusting things to be burned to ashes and buried in the ground. That would be more suitable for them to return to their homeland. Yin Yi continued, the group of zombies outside was led by the experimental subjects at that time. They surrounded them but didn't kill them. In fact, they wanted to torture this group of people until they collapsed bit by bit. They wanted to make them suffer a fate worse than death, and then kill them. But they didn't expect that the reinforcements would come so quickly. Chapter 285. Xiao Qing nodded. She didn't say what she was going to do. She just sat in the corner. When she closed her eyes, the daughter seeds had been quietly spread out. Any paranormals who hadn't reached level 4, or those with special abilities, would be quietly infiltrated by her daughter seeds. In other words, the life and death of this group of people were in her hands. However, Xiao Qing understood that these people could die, but they had to have nothing to do with her. Otherwise, it would be very troublesome. By the time night had completely fallen, everyone was exhausted. Wave after wave of attacks had exhausted their physical strength. If this continued, their defenses would be breached very soon. Before the new wave of attacks came, what they needed to do was to change the defense. Those who were resting would take the place of this group of people. One of them suddenly said, "Why do I feel so cold? The weather is changing more and more." Xiao Qing looked out of the window. Countless zombies were wandering. At this time, a sharp howl sounded. Another wave of attacks began. At night, there was no light. The whole warehouse was dark. Xiao Qing could clearly see cracks on the door and windows. There was a very simple principle called thermal expansion and contraction. Xiao Qing had to admit that those experimental subjects were very smart. They used ice and fire powers to break the last barrier under the cover of the night. If she didn't know those things, Xiao Qing would definitely remind them. However, after knowing everything, Xiao Qing didn't want to remind these beasts. No, calling them beasts was simply an insult to beasts. Lambs would kneel for milk, crows would feed back, and these beasts were completely heartless. Soon, the doors and windows were completely broken. Those who had just changed the defense didn't have time to react. Zombies poured in. There were several different zombies in the zombie crowd. In addition to the little girl, the blind boy, and the young man with the baby zombie in his chest, there were several other zombies with different appearances. One of them was a woman. Her appearance was very gentle, especially her pair of gentle eyes. Other than the scare of her eyes being a little smaller, she looked very normal. However, the skin and flesh on her hands were almost completely rotten. Moreover, they seemed to be much thicker than a normal person's arms. The other was a young man. His face was pale, but there was a bulge on his back, which made him look like a born turtle. He was bare-chested. When he turned around, people could see that there was a woman's face on his back. It was a woman's face that looked exactly like him. The woman could even talk. She had been crying softly. "Brother, brother, I'm in pain." It was said that those who were older either died on the operating table or were destroyed after the experiment because they were worthless. There were only a few experimental subjects left. The one who controlled the zombie crowd was the baby zombie living in the young man's chest. Its body was weak, so it had to rely on the young man to move. The group of researchers almost went crazy. What could be more terrifying than their experimental subjects coming back for revenge? Xiao Qing looked at the group of experimental subjects indifferently. She didn't want to do anything. It seemed that she didn't need to do anything. The only thing she had to think about now was how to take Lan and Yi away. She and Air Dai would definitely be fine, but Lan and Yi would attract the attention of the zombies. Those people had now collapsed. They almost gave up resisting, but at this time, there was a light not far away, and there was a lot of noise. Chapter 286. Lu Dong's old voice was heard, "Look, the rescuers are here. Hold on a little longer. Just a little longer and we'll be rescued." Only then did those people pull themselves together and carry out the last resistance, fighting and retreating, waiting for rescue. Those zombies also became anxious, seeing that the rescue team was about to arrive. If they did not quickly end the battle, they would be surrounded. Maybe some of them can survive this time. Even God doesn't help them. Yin Ye's disappointed voice sounded in Xiao Qing's ears. He said in a low voice, "When it's over, you have to be careful. They won't let you, who know their secret, live. You." Before Xiao Qing could finish speaking, she saw Yin Yi stand up and slowly walk toward Lu Dong. Lu Dong was very vigilant. As soon as he heard the footsteps, he turned his head. "Yin Yi, what are you doing?" Yin Yi didn't say anything, but the white coat on his body fluttered as if it was blown by the wind. When he was about to approach Lu Dong, his clothes were instantly torn apart, and several black tentacles shot out in an instant. The two people standing in front of Lu Dong had their bodies pierced by the tentacles in an instant. Then, Yin Yi quickly took a step forward, and the other tentacles wriggling around him aimed at Lu Dong. Lu Dong took 2 steps back in panic. Soon, he calmed down. Yin Ye's tentacles seemed to be stuck on an invisible barrier and couldn't move forward. "You actually..." Lu Dong was so frightened that he lost his voice. Yin Yi glanced at him and seemed to know that he wouldn't be able to kill Lu Dong today. He turned his head to the others, and the other experimentals quickly gathered with Yin Yi. Only then did Xiaoqing understand why she kept feeling that something was amiss when Yin Yi was telling the story. How could those controlled experimental subjects escape so easily? They were obviously set free by Yin Yi. He watched Lu Dong and the others do such a thing, but he couldn't do anything to stop them. Under the torment of conscience and guilt, Yin Yi did something crazy. He injected himself with the zombie virus and then experimented on himself. Obviously, Yin Yi had successfully modified himself. Then, he carried out the second step of destroying Lu Dong and the others. He secretly released the experimental subjects and then led this group of experimental subjects to take revenge. There was one thing that Yin Yi didn't tell her, but Xiaoqing knew that Lu Dong's experiment wasn't as simple as Yin Yi said. They seemed to have transplanted parts of zombies or mutant animals into superpowered people's bodies. For example, the eyes on the little girl's face, which clearly didn't belong to her, the arms of the young man, and finally the tentacles on Yin Ye's body. They were destined not to be able to kill Lu Dong today because they didn't know how long Lu Dong's spiritual barrier could last. Therefore, what they needed to do was to kill as many researchers as possible. When there were very few people left, the rescue team finally arrived. Yin Yi waved his hand and said, "Retreat." When they passed by Xiaoqing, Xiaoqing said softly to Yin Yi, "Don't worry, he won't live long." "Thank you very much." Yin Yi lowered his voice and said. The zombies retreated like a tide. The rescue team was dumbfounded. They were ready to fight hard and lose a lot of people, but those zombies ran away by themselves. But it was a good thing after all. The leaders of several bases hurried into the warehouse. As soon as they entered, they saw corpses everywhere. Only Lu Dong and the other 3 people in white coats were still alive. Of course, Xiaoqing and the others were more conspicuous. One of the leaders of the bases hurriedly said, "Sorry, we came late. It took us some time to gather people, but we didn't expect." Chapter 287. Lu Dong hadn't recovered from his panic. He didn't expect that Yin Yi would dare to experiment on him. He didn't react until Xiaoqing patted her butt and took Air Dai and the others out. He pointed at Xiaoqing and said, "Get her. Everyone, catch her. She's in cahoots with zombies." No matter what, they couldn't let Xiaoqing live. Otherwise, all their secrets would be exposed. Those people were stunned for a moment, then they looked at Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing didn't get angry, she just calmly raised her eyebrows and said, "If you want to speak, you need evidence. Is this old mister scared out of his wits? I just came here to deliver supplies. What does it have to do with zombies? Secondly, before I came here, I was on a mission with someone else. When I returned to the base, you were already surrounded. Many people can testify to that. How could you have time to collude with zombies? You must have been scared out of your mind." Lu Dong said with conviction, "Yin Yi is a zombie who lurked here. You were so close to him and talked so much. There must be something wrong. Besides, the man behind you is not a human. If you want to prove that you have nothing to do with zombies, sure. Zombies can't talk. Let him say something." Xiaoqing's eyes were filled with frost. She looked at Lu Dong as if she was looking at a dead man. She sneered and said, "He had a disease when he was young. He was burned until he became stupid. He's not a mute, but he's more like a mute. You want him to talk to prove that he's not a zombie? You're really trying to frame him." Qin Zishi and the others were also in the crowd. They said, "Open your eyes and listen with your ears. Don't be scared out of your wits. Everyone looks like a zombie's accomplice." At this moment, Lu Dong was no longer the same person who would comb his hair neatly even when he was on the run. Even a fly would break its leg if it stood on his hair. Now, he was even older, and his gaze was filled with despair and madness. Say something. Say something. Xiao Qing looked at Lu Dong coldly. She was holding a vine in her hand. She was ready to kill Lu Dong directly. However, Dai suddenly approached her and hugged her. He said in a hoarse voice, "Qing." Xiao Qing was stunned. She seemed to have heard Dai call her. Was it a hallucination? Dai rubbed Xiao Qing's neck with his face. He said with difficulty, "Qing." His voice was as if he hadn't spoken for many years. But, Xiao Qing was overjoyed. She turned around and held Dai's chin, her eyes sparkling. "What did you call me?" Dai looked very serious. He said with difficulty, "Qing." Xiao Qing kissed Dai happily. Yan Qiue, who was in the crowd, was jealous. He was jealous, but he couldn't vent his anger on his own people. So, he pointed his gun at Lu Dong and said, "Are you scared out of your mind? If you're crazy, you should be taken away. Take your medicine and lock him up. Don't let him out to bite people." Some people who were looking at Xiao Qing and the others with vigilant eyes also breathed a sigh of relief. It was better to be safe than sorry. After Dumbo Yi proved his identity, Lu Dong became dispirited. He had originally made a guess. Since he was at the end of the road, he had no choice but to try to bite Xiao Qing. Unexpectedly, he had guessed wrong. As long as Xiao Qing revealed what he had done, not only would his reputation be ruined, but he would also be put under house arrest. Lu Dong had enjoyed a lifetime of glory, a lifetime of being high and mighty. How could he allow Xiao Qing to ruin everything? However, Xiao Qing didn't seem to want to say it out. She took Lan's hand and went to Qin Zishi. She handed Lan to Qin Zishi and said, "I brought her back safely, but she was scared out of her wits. You have to give her a raise." Qin Zishi smiled, and two small dimples appeared. "Don't worry." A group of people came and went back in a mighty manner. It was as if they didn't have anything to do. They didn't leave directly, but stayed in the reservoir. After all, the dead bodies had to be dealt with. Otherwise, it would be troublesome if they turned into zombies. What's more, it's nighttime. What if they get attacked by zombies? So, they had to stay here and wait for dawn to return to the base. Xiao Qing calmly gathered her friends and called Qin Zishi. After all, Lan was there. Qin Zishi would definitely know the inside story. It was better for her to have the final say. After everyone was gathered, Xiao Qing checked to see if anyone was eavesdropping. Then, she told her friends everything that had happened in the past 2 days, including her guess. Gu Pan Pan was the most bad-tempered one. She jumped up and was ready to kill Lu Dong and his friends. What the hell? How can such scum deserve to live? I'll send them to hell. Don't be impulsive. Didn't you see that he has already pointed the finger at me today? He's just worried that I'll expose everything he's done. I originally wanted to expose all these things, then ruin his reputation and let him die painfully. But I thought of another point. According to Yi, the General Research Institute of the capital city is quite clear about their affairs. In other words, they don't mind Lu Dong's human experiments. If this matter is exposed, will they protect Lu Dong? I don't want to bet on whether they have a conscience or not, so I'm going to suppress this matter for the time being and do it myself. Xiao Qing said lightly. She couldn't trust the senior management of the capital city anymore. Instead of hoping that they would deal with Lu Dong, she would do it herself. Chapter 288. Qin Zishi was calmer than Xiao Qing imagined. He bit his nails and said after a while, "I think it's feasible." Xiao Qing nodded. It was not that her idea was too dark, but the world was like this. All the crows in the world were equally dark. Instead of hoping that the capital would do something to Lu Dong, she would rather do it herself. What was the saying again? Do it yourself to get enough food and clothing. Something seemed wrong. In short, Xiao Qin was ready to kill. She would not let Lu Dong reach the capital. After a peaceful night, Lu Dong requested to set off early the next morning. He would not be at ease until he reached the capital. It was not his fault that he was timid. It was just that he had been on tenterhooks all this time. He had reached the bottom line. If it went on like this, he would collapse before anyone could kill him. Only when he reached the capital, contacted the research institute, and got his personal protection, could he be at ease. Xiao Qin was too lazy to pay attention to him. She was teaching Dai how to speak sentence by sentence. Yesterday's sentence was like a flash in the pan. No matter how Xiao Qin guided Dai could not say a word. Looking at his aggrieved appearance, Xiao Qin sighed helplessly. She had a long way to go. Since the morning, Lu Dong had been emphasizing that Xiao Qin wanted to harm him and wanted others to separate them. The person in charge of the survival base in S-City patted Xiao Qin's shoulder and said, "I heard that the researcher beside him is a zombie who has been hiding for a long time. He is probably scared. Now everyone looks like a zombie to him. We can only temporarily separate you and him. Sorry for the inconvenience." Xiao Qin waved her hand and said, "I understand. Anyway, he will be sent back to the capital soon. Out of sight, out of mind." The more isolated they were, the easier it would be to do it. No one would suspect her. After all, no one would think that she would do something to Lu Dong when Lu Dong had been targeting her. The darkness under the light was like that. The more Lu Dong targeted her, the less suspicious she would be when something happened. Xiao Qin was very leisurely. She even had time to cut fruits and share them with her friends. She was now waiting for nightfall. Once nightfall arrived, it would be her home ground. They did not directly send Lu Dong and the others to the capital. Instead, they first returned to the nearest base to rest and reorganize. Then, they mobilized a portion of their men to act as escorts to send Lu Dong back to the capital. The first night after leaving the reservoir was not spent in the base. They set up camp on the spot. In order to protect Lu Dong's tent was set up in the center. The others' tents surrounded his tent several times. He had also set up 4 night watch squads to take turns with each other. If anything were to happen, they would be able to react quickly and protect Lu Dong. In the evening, they ate pork bone soup stewed with vegetables. The soup was freshly cooked and the vegetables were fresh. The taste was very delicious. After eating, Xiao Qin and the others went into the tent to conserve energy. Night came quickly. In the wee hours of the morning, Xiao Qin woke up from her sleep. She plucked a petal of the autumn lotus and tore through space. After the evolution of her special ability, Xiao Qin's control over the power of space had become much smoother. Although she could cross space through cracks before, the landing point and distance were all within a general range. Now, she could control it very carefully. For example, when she appeared in Lu Dong's tent from her tent, Lu Dong and the others were sleeping very soundly. Especially after the fragrance of the autumn lotus slowly filled the air, they slept even more soundly. Xiao Qin picked one out of the 4 who had escaped the net. Of course, this person was not Lu Dong. She would let Lu Dong die in the end, dying in endless fear and despair. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.